Okay.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to another wonderful tasting with the Virtual Tasting Society. I am Vadim Perlovsky, and today I am delighted to welcome back one of our star guests that we had in the year of 2020. Welcome back to another tasting with us with the fantastic portfolio of Glenmorangie is Dan Crowell. Crowell? Say your last name.
Crowell. It's Crowell like bowl, but
Crowell.
similar to Glenmorangie, the distillery. Glenmorangie is uniformly mispronounced, and we just don't mind. So you can call me whatever you'd like.
But you have the similar emphasis on the O. So bold.
Yes. Crowell, exactly. Yes, exactly.
Crowell and Glenmorangie. There we go.
Perfect.
Welcome
Wow.
back. We're so happy to have you. Thank you very much for joining us. We have a fantastic group of folks joining us today to taste a really stellar lineup. As always, we're not doing base, but we are setting the base with the original, and we have some fantastic expressions about the path less traveled, I believe. So we have a few awesome expressions in this lineup.
Absolutely.
Majority of the guests here are with the LA Whiskey and Spirits Guild. It's nice to see David Donahue joining us tonight. He is the president of said guild. David, if you want to say a couple words.
Vadim, I'd be very happy to say a couple words. First of all, Dan, it is an absolute pleasure to have you back. I have to say that I have regarded you in the status of legendary virtual tasting events from the last time that you did one. Vadim, as I'm not sure if he told you, what we've done close to 140 virtual tastings.
Wow.
And I regard yours in the top 5.
Oh, well, thank you.
Welcome back. Yeah, you did a spectacular job. I think there's very few virtual tasting presenters that have your knowledge, your sense of humor, and your way to turn a phrase. So I will leave it at that. I'm excited for those who are here to be able to kind of enjoy what it is that you bring to an event like this. So thank you very much. And thank you, Vadim, for making the arrangements to do this again.
Thank you, David. So as David said, welcome back, everyone. You are in for a treat. Not only do you have fantastic whiskeys in front of you to taste, which are a delight, we do have the pleasure of having Dan here. So for those of you who don't know, Dan is the national brand ambassador for Glenmorangie. He has certifications and degrees and all these things, very knowledgeable. So if you have any questions, feel free to toss them in the chat. Ask away. We're here to get nerdy. We're here to learn, whether it's yeast or wood or grain or what have you. There are a few people in the world that could give you as eloquent and as awesome a response as Dan. So take advantage. All of that said, I'd rather hear Dan's voice than mine, so I'm going to pass it over to you.
Right on. Thank you, Vadim. It's always an honor and pleasure to hang out with you in the group. David, thank you a ton for your very kind words. Tim, thanks for the "you can call me Ray" reference. It makes me feel less alone in the world of the middle-aged at this point. So thank you for that. Very appreciative. So as Vadim and I were kind of talking through, okay, what do we do next? Because we did the we did a more sort of a standardized look at the Glenmorangie portfolio back in 2020. It was lovely, delicious, and interesting. But one of the things that I wanted to sort of veer off into the intellectual ditch at Glenmorangie and try some things that don't necessarily get as much spotlight or time on stage, or things that I don't get as much of a chance to talk about on a regular basis. And as Vadim had mentioned, it's geek hour, so feel free, drop whatever you'd like into the chat, throw a hand up, just blurt out whatever it is. It doesn't have to be questions, observations, anything that you'd like to chat about. It is open season on chatting about whiskey, not just Glenmorangie, but really anything that you want to cover off on topic wise as we go through these. So the ones that Vadim and I sort of settled upon, I wanted to focus a bit on the front end. The first 3 whiskeys have a lot in common. Now they all have the distillery in common, but the first three have quite a lot in common in as much as the maturation regimen is based on ex-bourbon oak alone. So starting with original, I think, is always a good idea from the perspective of establishing the distillery character. If you had yourself a copy of, and I can't quite reach it, a copy of the, yes, I can. Hang on just a second. Oh, there we go. If you had yourself a copy of the Malt Whiskey Yearbook, that lovely little tome right there, then you look this up. Let's see, what do we have to say? There's typically a reference to house style or Glenmorangie characteristic, or you know, what you can expect from the main, or from the principal output of the distillery, somewhere in there.
Are we
And
looking at 22 or 21?
I'm on 22, and it's no big deal. But if you're looking to identify the core style at Glenmorangie, what anybody who's describing the distillery character is really describing is original. This is what we've done for a very, very, very long time. It forms the basis for a lot of the other things that we do at Glenmorangie, in as much as if you had yourself a bottle of Glenmorangie La Santa, for example, for the first 10 years of its life, it's very, very closely resembling original. It wouldn't take much to tweak it into being able to be bottled at original at that point, But what we'll do is we'll take that out of ex-bourbon oak and replace its maturation medium with a combination of Oloroso and PX sherry cask. Leave it for 2 years and it becomes La Santa. So the family resemblance, the characteristic family resemblance that runs through the Glenmorangie range can be traced back to original. And we can look at these and we don't have to, but I've just pulled up, when we get to actually drinking this stuff, I've pulled up some of Bill's notes, just so that we can have a look at where Bill's head's at. Dr. Bill Lumsden, our master distiller, where his head's at regarding the aromatic and flavor profile characteristics of all these whiskeys. But for right this minute, just some housekeeping stuff. Glenmorangie is a coastal North Highland single malt Scotch whiskey. Jeff has kindly shown us, unless you are sitting right now in front, of course, it'd be very early in the morning there, so it wouldn't look quite like that. But Jeff Timmy's background is, in fact, the still house and the lighthouse and the fermentation house at Glenmorangie. You can sort of see there, and that's the inside. Thanks, Jeff. Jeez, this check is in the mail, man. So what you've got there is the inside of the still house. You can sort of see there's 12 stills in there and another 2 in the lighthouse. Thanks. And they're very tall. In fact, they are the tallest copper pot stills in the Scottish whiskey industry. So what does that give us when you're talking about the dynamics inside of a still? So I have to back up into what happened during fermentation. Were you looking at a long, a short fermentation? Were you looking at fermentation in wood or steel? What were you looking for in your fermentation base? And how much of that do you want to make sure is reflected in your new make spirit, and in what levels, what concentrations? When you are distilling the alcohol out of your fermentation base, your wash, it interacts with copper, and copper sort of snags and drags out sulfur compounds, and to a degree, depending on where your cut points are, you can drastically reduce your fusel oil characteristic as well. So that sort of meaty, sulfury oiliness that is desired in some styles of whiskey, that's not what we're looking for at Glenmorangie. Those enormously tall stills will let you know that we're looking for reflux. We're looking for our spirit vapors to have as much contact with copper as possible in a batch still setup, so that those particularly citrusy, fruity, floral characteristics that were produced in the fermentation phase can be more revealed through the course of distillation. We're keeping a very narrow cut towards the top end of the spirit run. Head run is at Glenmorangie is about 15 minutes, and then we're only on spirit. Let's see, from 72 to 60 And then the rest of it goes into the heads and tails go to the Faints receiver and get redistilled at some point. That goes into the charger with the wash on the front end. But what we're looking for in general with that still setup is a nice, light, fruity, floral, exposed heart kind of a spirit. So when that comes off the still, it's going to get cut to 63.5 ABV, and then it's going to go into a combination of first and second fill, ex-bourbon oak. If you think about a cask as a giant wooden tea bag, the more you use it, the less it does for you. We don't end up using ex-bourbon oak casks more than twice at Glenmorangie because they need to deliver what we need in order for original to taste like original. So if you've got original poured, then we can maybe just dig into the aromatics of this thing first and foremost, and it'll be a good indicator of what I'm talking about in terms of revealing the citrusy, fruity, and floral characteristics of the new make, combined with some really interesting and compelling ex-bourbon white American oak notes that will happen over the course of the 10 years that this spirit spends in those casks. If you were to isolate the first fill elements and the second fill elements, of course, the first fill ex-bourbon oak matured Glenmorangie is going to have more wood characteristic because the wood's been used less. So there'd be more of those compounds that are a little bit more obvious on the nose and palate, and you can track those down as being characteristics of toasted coconut, sea salt caramel, vanilla, honey. You tend to run into some cake spice elements there as well. Those would be fairly strong indicators of the presence of the oak in maturation. The things in here that are not those things are not entirely attributable to the new make, but they certainly, you can trace a number of them back to the new make itself. Time and oxidization are going to have a net effect on what you have in the glass here with Glenmorangie Original as well. But just digging into the aromatics of it, it is lovely. There's a lot going on there, and I'm just making sure. Yeah, that's absolutely true. So I figured we'd go original. Thank you for pointing that out. Cadboll batch 1, Cadboll batch 2, Taylor winner 18 and Signet. So that's that back there. That order, and I'll kind of camera 2, I suppose you could. That's what we're working on currently. There you go. So as we're digging into this thing, of course, as I try to point out in as many of these things as I do, what you are smelling, what you are tasting, the general experience of this thing is entirely your own. It is your domain. You cannot be wrong. You are infallibly correct. How you choose to drink this is your domain, and nobody gets to tell you any different. All you're trying to do is make your face as happy as your face can be in that moment, and how that comes about, or what the sensations that your brain tells you you're experiencing, are completely and entirely your own. This is a bit like a liquid movie version of the life of Glenmorangie told to you in your voice. So if this is a mode of communication, then you are closing an important communication circuit by consuming it, then the story of Glenmorangie gets told to you in your voice, making it your story as well. When you consume this, you become a part of the Glenmorangie story. If we built a distillery in a forest and no one was around to drink it, would it even be whiskey? Yeah, technically, but who cares? If nobody's around to drink it, then why make it? Not just from a profit perspective. It's nice to make enough money to keep the distillery going, and we've been around 179 years, so that seems to be going relatively well for us. But the idea being, this is communication first. This is people devoting their lives and the lives of their ancestors and the passed down knowledge from those past generations, been making this stuff for 179 years. All of those stories are being it's a story of place. It's a story of the Dornoch Firth. It's the story of the coastal North Highlands, the sort of the whole Black Isle Peninsula. We're not exactly on the island, but we're very close. And the history of whiskey making in Scotland goes back a very long way. The Farintosh distillery goes back to the late 1600s or early 1700s. So there are people making whiskey in this area long before we were in 1843, certainly. So their stories are being told here as well. What you're really trying to do, yeah, it's an inebriative, mild neurotoxin, all that stuff. Yep, those things are true, but that's not the point. The whole point here is that this should speak to you and to bring you into a continuum or a circle that allows you to be woven into the story of Glenmorangie, and for Glenmorangie to become part of your story as well, which is a distinct honor that we take very, very seriously. This is connective. The people, this is like a giant Brady Bunch. This is connective stuff. This is communal stuff. There aren't that many opportunities to celebrate community in the modern world, and this is one of them. Not just those of us who are here now, but the community that connects us to Scotland and Scottish whiskey. That's a very important, I think, a very important connection. And it makes this less about this whiskey. It's delicious. I'm drinking it. I'm having a good time. It is about that, but it's about more than that. If you want to crack that book open and blow the dust off and dig into these stories, they're ready to be told to your senses in a very immersive way if you want them to be. Now, there's the whole idea of water, if that is absolutely or even partially or kind of or sometimes your thing, yay, go for it. I think the relationship between water and whiskey is a very personal one and very specific to whiskey. What whiskey you're consuming. Does it respond well to water? Does it not? Is it of an advanced age, or is it young? Is it bottle of cask strength? Is it bottle of 40 or 43 or 45 or 46? All those things, you take those things into consideration, then you make your decision regarding whether water goes into your whiskey. In this case, I'm just consuming original neat. Just for the sake of argument, I'll throw these. These are some abridged versions. If you've met Dr. Bill Lumsden, he's not nearly as succinct as these tasting notes make it seem. He is a let's say where'd it go? Is it happening? Is anything happening? Share. There we go. So hopefully I'll just put this into presentation mode so you can see what's going on there. Maybe. So these are just some tasting notes from Bill. Yes, the age is at least 10 years old. Bit of citrus, peaches, vanilla softness on the nose. And those citrus and peach notes are certainly coming from the new make, but also from the passage of time in a cask and the softness. Oxidative softening is one of the things that happens when in the interaction between the pocket of air, the ever-expanding pocket of air in a cask, and the spirit that is encased within that cask. There is an ongoing scale of softening that happens via oxidization that gives that roundness, that softness on the palate, that lovely integratedness that I think Glenmorangie does incredibly well. And Original is a really terrific example of that. Flavor-wise, we'll dig into that now. Just drop a little onto the palate, roll it around, give it the old Kentucky chew, and see how that goes for you. Boy, that's good whiskey. This is one, I don't necessarily, it's funny. Every time I look around at the sample closet here, I don't remember drinking lots of Original, but I never have any. They send it to me and it's always gone. And part of that is because it's part of a lot of the different tastings that I get invited to and do virtually and so on and so forth. And part of it is I just can't keep my hands off this stuff. So not that you wouldn't want to tell my bosses, but it's just it's an extraordinary whiskey. We'll sort of, you see what's happening there. Flavor profile wise, yeah, vanilla, certainly. Citrus for me, this is like a cream pie sort of lemons and bananas and creaminess, a little bit of pastry crust, sort of a biscuity note happening in there as well. Oh man, I just can't. It's an orange. When you go after, you get yourself a citrus peeler, and the citrus oils kind of shoot out at you if you're making an old fashioned to something, and you get that spray of citrus oil. Certainly, that's there in the aromatics and flavor profile characteristics. Lovely mouthfeel, nice weighty creaminess to it. Maybe some freshly grated nutmeg floating around in there if you're digging. There's like almost a tiny bit of waxiness, just even on the nose as well. If anybody's added water and your face is even happier than it was, great. If you've added water and you've found this to be compellingly different, but neither better nor worse, yay. If you've added water and you want to reach through the screen and strangle me for suggesting it, I apologize. But there will be some differences. Anytime you add water to any whiskey, it's going to change. Whether that will change is a positive or a negative one, or a compellingly different and interesting but just as good change, is entirely dependent on how your face parts react to the whiskey once you put water in it.
Dan, I think you're a person that can definitely answer this question that I've wanted to ask for a long time. How do you add water to a dram, and how does the water affect the whiskey from like a legitimate standpoint?
Yeah, so I mentioned just briefly in passing a few parameters that I apply to the question. How old is the whiskey? What bottling strength is the whiskey? Is my water source as pure as I can get, free from chlorination, free from excessive minerality, and so on and so forth? Geez, if you're bored at some point, I did this during the teeth of lockdown on my YouTube channel. It's just my first and last name YouTube channel. There's a 31-minute segment where I pour 10 drams of original, and one is a control group, and the other ones I add 9 different types of water to. So that's mineral water, still water, filtered water, a Topo Chico just for fun, distilled water, and a bunch of other ones that I came up with. Alkaline water. There's as many waters as a tap water that I could get a hold of, and then went through the sensory evaluation of those 9 types of water. And it was remarkable how different each one of them was from the others. I thought distilled water would be, holy crap, this is going to be perfect. It wasn't my favorite, I have to say. Here in Nebraska, maybe it's throughout the Midwest, these folks called Ideal Pure Water, one of the more ubiquitous reverse osmosis bottled waters out there, ended up being my favorite. It's pretty run of the mill. I thought I picked up some mineral water, the stuff that they serve at all the Queen's Royal residences. I think I still have some. Oh, I do. So this is as close as I can find to the chemical makeup of Charlotte Springs. So this is Hilden water. You probably can't see that all that well, but that's Hilden water, English mineral water. And we used to rely on Badois mineral water to be the closest bottled representation of Charlotte Springs, our water source. Badois has, at least for a while, went sort of dry, so they couldn't bottle it. But I tried some Hilden as well. As much as this is a really delicious water to just sit around cranking down, it didn't produce my favorite result either. So what you're looking at there, the chemical dynamics of what you're doing when you're adding water to a whiskey. So you've got ethanol and you got water, and then everything else is essentially an impurity. So each one of those things, each one of those impurities has a relative solubility level in alcohol or water. So when you change the alcohol water dynamic even just a little bit, then those things that are more soluble in one than the other tend to either come out or be subdued by the addition of more water. Now you're doing one other thing as well. Obviously, you're reducing the alcoholic strength of the liquid in the glass even by a tiny bit. And one of the things that happens over the course of pouring a whiskey into a glass, vaporization, volatility. Each one of the compounds in a glass of whiskey has a relative volatility. Then that volatility is going to be the determiner as to how quickly that compound vaporizes out of the glass. So the high volatility compounds are the first to vaporize in the glass. Now, the first ones, when you freshly pour a glass of whiskey, and you get your nose down and then you get a big whiff in. They're the tingly ones. They're the ones that sort of light up your sinuses a little bit. 10, 15, 20 minutes later, those have dissipated and they're pretty well gone. But if you've poured and you kind of want to get in and get after this thing, the addition of a drop or two of water can help dissipate the collected high volatility vapors in the glass as well. So you're messing around with the chemical makeup of what's in the glass, adjusting the presences of the impurities based on their relative solubilities in water and alcohol. You're releasing, it's an exothermic reaction, so you're releasing a tiny bit of heat. And this is all for sort of non-cast strength whiskeys. I find that cast strength whiskeys are like the quantum physics of drinking. The rules sort of apply differently to cast strength whiskeys for me, and their relationship with water. The esters, the fruitiness, the long chain fatty acids that taste like fruit, smell and taste like fruit in whiskeys, can be bound up in ethanol, can be bound up in alcohol. The ester bond, the higher the ABV, the more they can be bound up. And so you have to sort of, you don't have to do anything. Sure, whiskey, you can do what you want. But if I'm drinking a cast strength whiskey, I'm considering not just the addition of water, but how much. This is 43 ABV. There's plenty of water in it. Just was added a while ago. So what I'm trying to do in the addition of water to a whiskey like this is engage in that chemical reaction in real time, so that those changes that I have control over can happen here in real time. It doesn't take much water to do that. A couple drops will do it. In a cast strength whiskey, it's a bit like showing up to a knife fight with a bit of a spork. If you just a couple of drops of water in a cast strength whiskey, and it's like, is that all you got? It's still, the ester bond is still there. It's still hiding from you behind a wall of its own potency. So I tend to try to ride to the rescue of that princess trapped in the tower by 5-10% added water to my cast strength whiskeys, unless in the case of a whiskey like Ardbeg Ugadal, for example. I just think that that's a lovely whiskey neat. It doesn't necessarily appeal to me more once water goes in. I don't find that there is a tremendous ester bond sort of hide and seek element to Ugadal, so I drink that one neat. But Corey Vrecken tends to be one like water on a wax fire. It just gets so much more expressive once the water goes in, and that's a good 5 or 10%. A drop of water in Corey Vrecken, you can hear it almost laughing at you and mocking you, because it's just not going to give up the ghost. You have to show up to that knife fight with a knife, as opposed to some other implement that is less knife-like, as it'll sense your fear and sort of hide from you because it knows that you don't really mean business. So that's for me sort of the psychology behind my decision-making process in terms of the addition of water and not the addition of water. Obviously, the real litmus test is if I've added water and I like it, then great. If I added water and I don't like it, then that's a bit of a bummer. But the science behind it is pretty real and absolutely worth experimenting with and messing around with. Yeah, in the here and now, it's a bit like getting a haircut. If it goes well, then everybody's happy. If it doesn't go well, you live with the result. But we'll make more. We'll make more. This is not the end of the planet. There's no real harm has been done. You can just neck it and pour yourself a new one, and then you're back on the road to recovering that session from the jaws of a watery grave. No pun intended. So that's hopefully that answers the question. Probably.
When you're adding water, the question is that, do you just drop a few drops on top and just sip away right away? Because I've seen people swirl it vigorously to try to incorporate the water into it. Like, what are you trying to accomplish? Because I've heard of things of like you're trying to dilute it, but I've also heard, well, a drop of water on the surface separates the oils, you can taste better, blah, blah. I don't know if any of that is, or just
it's the thing about swirling in whiskey aggressively is that you're encouraging more high volatiles to escape the glass. And so if that's your thing, yay. I tend to give it a gentle swirl just to make sure that the water is incorporated and has access to all of those congeners or impurities so that it can mess with the ones that it wants to mess with and leave the other ones alone. So I just do a sort of a light integration, give it a second, give myself a bit of a nose back in, see how it's changed. One of my pals, and I'm sure that you're familiar with him, Joshua Hatton from Single Cask Nation, since they sell a lot of cask strength whiskeys, one of the clever things that he does, once he's poured a whiskey, he'll give it a second and then just give it a kind of a puff of air in the glass to get the high volatile concentration out of the glass, so that he can have a little bit more of a straight evaluation without the anesthetic effects of high concentration alcohol vapors on the olfactory epithelium. So it'll shut you down. It'll start to anesthetize your olfactory bulb. High concentration, it wears off quickly, but that's one way that he copes with that sort of phenomenon. But I tend to try to integrate it relatively gently, not, a few swirls around and you're good to go. The thing on the surface, okay, I get it. But it depends to a degree on whether that whiskey's been chill filtered, how many oils you're going to drive out of it. Non-chill filtered whiskeys, yeah, sure. It's probably a little bit more of a hydrophobic sort of a separation. And whether or not that is something that you could pick up in a blind tasting is the subject of fairly severe debate. But it's an interesting idea. It's an interesting concept. I don't necessarily subscribe to it all that readily. I'd rather have the water do the thing that the water got sent in to do, rather than sort of dance around the issue a bit. But again, that's just me. Hopefully that answered the question in as long-winded a way as possible. So post water, okay, so you're adding water. Here's one of those things that I meant to say and didn't. In very general terms, when you've added water to a whiskey, in super mega general terms, those compounds that are based on barrel extractives and those compounds that are based on, if they're present, on the floral characteristics that would have been produced in the fermentation phase, by and large, those tend to get a little bit of an advantage. If it's a level playing field once you pour the water, then the playing field starts to get a little bit bowed, favoring the barrel and the floral, and sort of sinking the ground underneath the feet of the center palate, fruity esterification elements of the whiskey, those things that taste and smell like fruit. Doesn't always happen that way. One other thing that tends to happen when I've added water to whiskey is if the elements of that whiskey that communicate any form of sweetness to me, they tend to be spread out across the palate when I'm drinking it neat. When I've added water, those elements tend to focus and drive down the middle of Main Street of my palate like they're on parade to a degree. It's a bit like my analogy for that is if you walked in, this is a person off the street, you walked into the UN and everybody's speaking different languages. Like, okay, there's a lot of different conversations going on all over this room. And somebody gives you the translator's headphones, and all of a sudden, all the conversations, you get them. They're all focused and they make sense. Water tends to focus the sweetness elements of a given whiskey and send them right down the center of my palate, at least. So, and sometimes that can make a whiskey a little less dimensional. Sometimes it can give it a little bit more focus. So it really sort of depends on, it's a bit like if you got asked to prom by the person you were hoping would ask you to prom, then you're pretty well happy dancing with that person. But if you got asked to prom by somebody that you were hoping wouldn't ask you to prom, but the person that you wanted to go to prom with was at prom, you spend your time dancing and looking over the shoulder of your date, figuring out where the person you really wanted to hang out with is. And then hopefully you find your way over and dance with that particular person. If the person that I wanted to invite me to this dance is more present in the neat version, I'm just going to continue to dance with that partner. But if let's say I'm drinking a whiskey, it's like, man, I'd like the barrel aspects to come a little bit more forward, or there's some lilac or some lavender in there. I kind of want to dance a little bit more aggressively with that partner. Some water in there may just sort of boost you towards your lavender potential date on the whiskey dance floor. Worth experimenting with anyway. So that's original. If you have the self-control and patience and intestinal fortitude to leave a little bit of that, it's nice to go back and compare the other ones to it. It's also really interesting to see how it evolves. All of these evolve in the glass over the course of time. In that little window down on that part, you can see I've got these little lids, and that's going to keep, to a degree, it's going to keep the high volatiles sort of trapped in the glass, so that I don't. These are here so that I don't end up with an amalgam of aromatics in front of me. I can sort of focus on what's in the glass as opposed to what's leaching out of all these glasses in terms of the high volatiles that create. This is particularly the case when you're doing an Ardbeg tasting. You take the lids off and it's like the Salem witch trials basically, and everything just becomes this massive thing. So the lids are very handy in terms of making sure that the stratification of the subtle uniquenesses of each of the aromatic characteristics of Ardbeg can be preserved with the little lids and stuff. I have them here so that I don't end up with a sort of a cloud of aggregate Glenmo face. Is sort of what's happening there. So I'm going to just lid that one back up for the hell of it and move on to the Cadboll estate. If I'm just going to look through the chat and make sure that I'm not ignoring things that I shouldn't be ignoring. Let's see.
You're good.
Okay, right on. Oh, thanks. Yeah, let me know, because
there's a lot of conversations going.
If I'm doing this, it's the bifocals kicking in, so I apologize for that.
Jason had an interesting note.
Michael, I'm sorry to hear that. It's sad. Nothing ruins a prom more than not liking your prom date. So yeah, sir, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, Jason had an interesting note that he gets on the 10 if he wants to share, but he gets more earthiness. But I'll let him. He's not.
Yeah, if you compare to like comparable 10, 12-year flagships, Glenmo's always had this earth dark note to it that none of the others in that 10-12 range ever have, because all the tasting notes talk about fruit and they talk about the light and they talk about the sweet, but they never mention that one little darkness that makes the honey's a little darker,
yes.
That kind of thing.
Yeah. Well spotted. I tend to sort of chalk that one up, no pun intended, to a chalkiness. I don't know if that's where your head's at, but it tends to me to have that sort of chalky, this like the soil in Cognac. I've never been there, but I've seen it. The soil in Cognac in Grand Champagne and Cognac is just shitty. It's terrible soil. It's all limestone. It's just chalky as hell. It's almost white. And the French believe, and I think it bears itself out in the liquid, that the vines that grow there have to struggle, have to suffer to get a hold of water because it's really crappy soil. And and the French would say that they suffer correctly. So I think that's perfectly fine, but that chalkiness is sort of what I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but I get that, and we don't talk much about that. It's a hard water distillery, and that may have something to do. It probably does, but there is that sort of. It isn't quite the same as a bog environment, like anaerobically decaying plant matter. It's not that kind of earth. It's a little bit more of a limestoney, chalky style of earthiness, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, and and if you look around, this is some stuff that nobody cares or even asked. Most of Scotland sits on a giant chunk of granite, so it rains a lot there. Most of that water, once it gets past sort of the spongy topsoil stuff, will hit granite and run off into lakes and rivers and streams. And that ends up being a thing that creates a lot of soft water, a lot of access to soft water. Minerally pretty poor, mostly pretty straight ahead rainwater. It hasn't had a lot of geological interaction. It hasn't had a lot of opportunity to interact with geological elements that are at least somewhat soluble in water. But in a couple of parts of Scotland, the surface rock is not granite. It's in fact limestone and sandstone. Jeff's photos earlier, you could see the building, and it's all red sandstone because that's the surface rock. So if you've got a lot of limestone and sandstone at the surface, then your water can permeate that rock and dissolve that rock over time, and then come bubbling up through a spring. Highland Park fans, you are drinking whiskey from the other distillery in Scotland that operates off of a spring-fed hard water resource. And it turns out that those two spots, Orkney and where we are on the coastal North Highlands, the surface rock is the same, red sandstone and limestone. So you end up with hard water there as long as it's spring-fed, as long as it's geologically interactive, and less of a sort of a runoff soft water resource. So that's at least in part why you might be running into that sort of chalkiness here. Boy, that's good whiskey. So I'm gonna relid that one and quick chat. Look good, yay. Right on. Okay, so if everybody's comfortable, moving on to whiskey number 2. This one is Glenmorangie Cadboll Estate batch number 1, which looks eerily similar to batch number 2. We'll talk about the specifics regarding these bottles and their livery momentarily. But this one is batch number 1. Coincidentally, the first one we did. What we did here is the Cadboll Estate is the arable farmland that surrounds Glenmorangie House. Has anybody stayed at Glenmorangie House? Glenmorangie House? Anybody? Jen, was that on your last trip? Did you stay there on the last one? So it's gone through quite a change. Russell Sage, the interior design guru in Scotland, had his way with our little coastal North Highland hunting lodge, and it shows. It's a different experience than it once was. It needed a little bit of updating. It's wow. In certain cases, it's quite the retina burner. So if you happen to stay at Glenmorangie House, just maybe wear sunglasses. But
Dan, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
What you did we just do Cadboll 2? Because I thought we were doing Cadboll 1 first.
And we start with original. So I was just messing around with original, and now I'm working on Cadboll Estate batch 1.
Oh.
Is that?
Okay.
Oh, yeah,
I thought we were on it already. I thought
sorry, no.
I'm ahead of you.
You would think by the amount of blathering I've done thus far that we would have already got there.
No.
Yes,
Keep
absolutely.
it up. I'm loving it. So.
Oh, good. Thank you. So Cadboll Estate batch 1, this and batch 2, and elements of Signet are based on barley that we grow on the estate that surrounds Glenmorangie House. So Jeff, you were there. I don't know if you took the walk down to the Firth. You can walk. There's that row of trees that you go out the back door and down to there's a whole bunch of gorse bush, and you sort of walk down the bank and onto the beach, and it's super easy to get lost coming back because it's not real obvious where you come back up the bank from experience. But everything that you see surrounding you there is the barley fields that the barley for this whiskey would have been sourced from. Glenmorangie is the number 4 single malt on the planet. The number 2 most frequently mispronounced single malt on the planet after our friends at Glenfiddich, but the number 4 single malt on the planet. So you wouldn't necessarily think that a whiskey of that size would be that interested in a hyper provenance whiskey, but in fact, that's what this is. All that barley was sourced from our own fields. It's not to suggest that we're growing a strain of barley that no one else is there. Certainly not. Those fields are sown with the same barley, the sort of the it girl barley that's happening across the industry, based on the idea that barley, boy, this is getting geeky. Barley loses its disease resistance on a scale of about 7 to 10 years at any given go. So the Scottish Barley Research Institute, what they do is they develop new strains over the course of time that the SWA, the Scotch Whisky Association, has to approve for use in the creation of Scottish whiskey. So they create loads and loads of micro strains, and this is all breeding programs. GMOs are illegal in the UK. So this is all barley breeding programs. And what you're trying to do is to create these new strains that maintain their alcoholic yield per ton of barley used and keep their disease resistance up, so that the farmers are less opposed to growing them, and the barley users have a nice consistent supply of high yield barley. So we're using the same at this point. It is, Laureate. I want to say that we're about to start sowing those fields with the new It Girl, which is Sassy, the latest, greatest disease resistant barley strain that the industry is transitioning towards is Sassy. Not that it talks back or anything, it's just called Sassy. We tend to, in the coastal North Highlands, it's really good barley growing country. So our barley tends to be creamy and rich. If you're just chewing on the malted version of that, there's a creamy, biscuity richness that comes out of the barley, that comes out of the Cadboll fields. And I think that's reflected here. So Bill decided that he wanted to do essentially a hyper provenance driven version of Glenmorangie. So this spends 15 years in ex-bourbon oak. Batch 1 was probably 85% first fill and about 15% second fill ex-bourbon oak, bottled at 43 ABV. So that's the one we're working on currently. You can tell it apart from batch 2 so this is batch 1 and batch 2. If you can see those, they look virtually identical, and my motor skills are pretty awful. So the only real difference, at least on the bottle, is what it says on the little neck band. This one, batch 1, just says limited edition. There you go. This one, batch 2, says limited batch 2 edition, but they look virtually the same beyond that. The boxes, slight difference there as well, but they are hard to tell apart on the shelf, and you may see us address those concerns in future packagings of Cadboll Estate. Not that I'm giving anything away, and not that I've revealed anything that I can get fired for, but worth keeping an eye on.
So what years are
into
these?
so these are both 15s, and the harvest years. Let me think about this. Harvest years would have been 2005 and 2006 is what we're looking for. Yeah. So, year before. Harvest years would have been 2004 and 2005, as there would have been what barley does that's really, really cool is it makes whiskey. But what it does intrinsically that's pretty cool is that it goes through a dormancy stage. So actually, boy, that would get even geekier. We'll talk about that in a second. But
Get geeky. Do not stop yourself.
barley left to its own devices would have a dormancy phase, so that if a barley corn grain drops off the stalk, it doesn't immediately germinate, because if that's happening, it's probably getting close to cold weather. And so it doesn't want to start growing and then immediately die. So evolution has taught it to have a dormancy phase until spring. Now, the term friability, not like deep fry, but FRI-ability, is a reference to the likelihood that a barley grain will germinate. So in terms of malting barley, you want a high friability likelihood when you're creating barley for beer or for whiskey production. You want each grain to be very likely to germinate. So much so that the barley breeding programs favor friability so much for the beer and whiskey industries that they're having an issue. Not just that the dormancy phase is shortening and shortening and shortening, but that in certain cases with certain strains, they're starting to germinate while they're still on the plant. So that's a thing that we're just trying to sort of keep in mind and mitigate. I have nothing to do with it, but those folks, the throbbing brains of barley production, are the ones that are sort of trying to keep that at bay to a degree. But in a normal circumstance, you've got this dormancy phase. So once you harvest your barley field, then you're going to knock the moisture level down and let it deal with its dormancy phase, store it, let it do its thing. So you're gonna have to store it for a number of months to allow it to get through its own dormancy phase before you would even attempt steeping and germination, the malting process. So that if you go back to, so that was bottled in 2020, that was bottled in 2021. So if you go back those 15 years plus another year, then you'd find the harvest year, if that makes even remote sense. So here, any observations for the good of the cause? Oh, I have some. Here we go. So these are, come on now, where'd it go? No, anybody? There we go. So let me just do a quick screen share, and this is going to be sort of Bill's notes on both, on batch 1 and batch 2. So I'll leave them up for a bit if you want to sort of, not that, you know, what he thinks isn't necessarily, you're not required to agree by any stretch of the imagination. So
should we do them side by side?
yeah, if you felt like it, why not? The only significant difference here is, and hopefully that, does that, are you just seeing the Cadboll screen? You're not seeing this other thing that I've just put over there, are you? I'll just minimize that just in case. So the only significant difference here is that batch 1 sees somewhere in the 10 to 15% second fill X bourbon oak maturation for that full 15 years. Batch 2 is all first fill. No use of second fill in batch 2 at all. So that's all our own barley, all 15 years in cask. It's all going to be the same fermentation schedule. It's all going to be the same cut points. It's all going to do all those things the same way. But the only real significant difference between these is that tiny bit of second fill use in batch 1 versus all first fill in batch 2. Doesn't sound like, on paper, doesn't sound like there'd be that much difference between the two, but it turns out, I think, there is a fairly significant difference between them.
And the plan is to do one of these every year. So you've been replanting the barley and harvesting it and putting down, because I mean, 15 years, right? That's a lot of foreshadowing. It's a lot of planning. Yeah.
So to your point, this would not have been, it wouldn't have been Laureate. It wouldn't have been Sassy. Obviously, those strains didn't exist then. It probably would have been Optic if you go back and do the math on it. Probably the strain here probably would have been Optic. And, you know, Bill, if you try to apply logic or reasoning or regimenting or scheduling to Dr. Bill, he chafes at the bit. So this may not be as regular as one might assume. And, you know, kind of who knows? I know that he's got some stuff up his sleeve, and some of it may be somewhat surprising. But wait, you know, the only thing I can tell you is to sort of watch this space. I'm reasonably certain there'll be a batch 3, and then because it's Bill, all bets are off after that. So even aromatically, they're different.
At what point do you change the barley ground? So it'd be a different.
So yeah, so great. So what would happen is you wouldn't necessarily, it wouldn't just be a straight change. What you'd typically do is you'd go from 100% of the barley that the industry is currently a big fan of. Once the industry starts to move towards the next It Girl strain, you'd go 50-50. You'd do a 50-50 split between the two strains, and then eventually you'd get into 100% of the newly developed high disease resistance strain. So at some point right now, we're probably working on a 50-50 split between Laureate and Sassy. And then eventually within probably a year or two, we will be 100% Sassy, and then the same process again, 50-50, 100% 50-50, just to try to mitigate any significant organoleptic differences between those barley strains. There's typically not much of one. But you just don't necessarily want to hang your entire hat on that always being the case.
And just so I get the visual for looking at the farm of barley, when you say 50-50, it's not going to be like you can visually see it. I'm guessing they just take a bunch of grain, put it together 50-50, I'll mix it all up, and then you just get it randomly spread out.
Oh, I see what you're saying. No,
It's not
we
like
would
half the
in
field
terms
is
of
one, half the field is the other.
in terms of sowing, we would at Cadboll Estate, we'd probably just move from one to the other. But in terms of sourcing, with Cadboll Estate, we probably would be a little bit more. We'd have to go straight from one to the other. That's a really good point. For Glenmorangie in general, we would order a 50-50 split from the malting agency, but because it's our own barley, unless we are holding back, which could be entirely possible. I need to ask Bill that whether he's holding back reserves, i.e. not using the entire yield of the fields every year, which he probably is, to be fair. He's probably holding back, particularly when it's time to switch microstrains. It's probably holding some supply back from the previous year so that we can, once it gets into the mill, we can sort of mitigate that a bit. I need to ask him that because it's pretty critical in terms of such a specific micro provenance here. That's a question I think that we need to dig into. It wouldn't have, for these at that point, we were still pretty much in the throes of optic. Getting into what's going into cask now that it will see the light of day in 15 odd years. Yeah, right this minute is a time where we're going to have to negotiate the waters of switching from one strain to another. So I want to know that, and so I'll find out and get back to you. Great question.
I was just curious, are you ever able to go back to the old strains?
Sure, yeah, you totally can. The only real problem with that is that you almost always would have to pre-buy the crop. The farmer doesn't want to take the risk that you're asking that farmer to take unless he or she knows that they'll get the return regardless of whether the yield is where you want it to be, whether the crop survives or whatever. There are people that there are distilleries that still use Golden Promise and that sort of thing, and they have to pre-buy the whole crop because of the sort of the documented loss of disease resistance. They're not going to take that risk unless you pay them to. But yes, it'll happen for sure.
Dan, do they have barley seed banks?
Seed banks. Good question. Well, I can't help but believe that absolutely, because the Scottish Barley Research Institute is a massive concern within the confines of the Scottish agriculture industry. So I'm certain that there's a library of past strains that's preserved there. I would stake. I only have one kidney left, but I would risk it that's true. Another one that I'll have to actually ask the question though, because I'm not 100% sure, but I cannot imagine that there isn't a catalog of developed strains. As a matter of fact, there's so many strains that get developed over the course of a given year's research. There's tens of thousands of them, and there are only a few, 4 or 5, that get approved by the SWA for use in whiskey production. I don't exactly know what those parameters are. Probably yield. There's loads of strains I'm sure that are produced that have lovely disease resistance and low yield, or lower yield than the industry wants. So I'm sure the SWA is the front end of nah, not going to work. Nope, not going to make anybody happy. This, yes, there are probably some organoleptics involved in terms of the overall flavor characteristics, but by and large, my suspicion is that those approvals are based on yield, on liters of pure alcohol per ton of barley used yield, not necessarily the yield from the field itself, not necessarily bushels per acre, but liters of alcohol produced per ton of barley. Does anybody have any preferences between these two? I'm just going to kind of stop that screen share and see if there are any thoughts.
One.
One's your preference. Okay, great. We've got a vote for one. Anybody want to throw a vote at 2 yet? Okay. Maria's got 2 down. That's fantastic. And are these neat so far? Anybody decided that you wanted to kick a little water in?
Neat.
With both
I
of these,
like-
I tend to stick to them neat, but that's just me.
I like number 1, and I was really surprised at how different they are. I expected them to be
Yeah.
much closer.
Exactly. Oh, nice. Some much cleverer tech savvy person has just created a poll that you can now vote in. Man, 2 this evening, 2 is just throwing off so much coconut. Just blasting out of the glass at me. And 1, we were talking about that chalkiness of original. 1's got more of that to me. That kind
And 2
of
votes
bashing.
outstanding.
Nice.
Last 2 people who are asleep, throw in your vote.
When I was a kid, I don't know. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say I agree with you on 1. One's still my favorite. 2, I didn't really like at first, although it's growing on me quite a bit. But I think that what you're calling chalky, I'm interpreting a little bit different, as sort of which I get with certain brands that I like, where it's almost like the beginning of a funk note to blue cheese. It doesn't finish the way blue cheese does, but just that first up part, which I find others interpret as chalky, and I really like that flavor, by the way. And I got it on 1, and I'm definitely getting it more on 2, which may be why I like it. Although now that 2's been resting, I'm getting that note a little bit more, which is why I think I'm liking it more. But that note, I just I got it first with another brand a couple of tastings ago, Qua's birthday, so like I don't know, a year 18 months ago, whatever it was, and been sort of chasing with other things, but I'm getting it here and I'm really enjoying it. A lot.
Yeah, that blue cheese reference, that's fantastic. It is just barely floating into that thing that makes blue cheese taste like that. That's sort of, I hesitate to use the word mold, but it is. There's that. It's just a tiny hint of that lovely sort of culinary mold thing that I love about blue cheese.
Yeah, I call it sort of a funk note, the beginning of the funk.
Yeah,
it doesn't.
It is.
It doesn't finish the way blue cheese does, but it just gets that beginning. Then I really dig it.
It's like the James Brown of maybe aromatics, the godfather of funk.
Like,
No, I taste, the first thing I tasted when I tasted the Cadboll number 1 was bourbon.
Oh yeah, nice, great.
It was bourbon forward to me, initially, compared to number 2. And what I find interesting is that there's second fill in number 1, whereas number 2 is completely first fill. So you would expect it to be more bourbon forward in the number 2 than in the number 1.
Yeah, absolutely. And yet number 2 to me is more coconut and mango, a little more tropical. Right. And somebody had mentioned the mouthfeel of 2. It is different. It's to me, it's creamier. It's those elements of American oak that sort of throw themselves into your faces as vanilla ice cream. That the creaminess there, and combined with the biscuity creaminess of Cadboll barley. I think it's the biscuity creaminess from the grain itself, combining with the lovely American X bourbon oak vanilla characteristics that give you that kind of combined sensation of creamy vanilla. Really, really nice drams. But I wanted to include them because they look identical on the shelf, and they are far from identical to each other. Certainly, there is a family resemblance. It's reasonably unmistakably a Glenmorangie style of whiskey making. But between them, there's a fairly broad gulf of experiential organoleptic differences from a whiskey marketing double speak point of view. Hell, I have more. I'm gonna douse each with just a couple of drops and see what happens. I haven't yet. This is probably I think it's a first. I've just been drinking them neat. And these, to be fair, I poured them an hour ago. So this is probably an exercise in reasonable pointlessness because all the high volatiles have escaped from the glass. They've really come into their own. They're at peace with themselves and their environment. So there's not a lot of angularity. There's not a lot of unsettledness happening here. It's more just a matter of messing around with relative solubility levels. If I'm doing normal tastings for non-geeks, I usually sort of refer to water as the liquid equivalent of messing with the EQ on your stereo. You're hearing the same music, but the pillars of its sonic signature are being delivered to your ears in different intensities when you mess with the EQ.
To me, the number one also had the peach notes that that the 10 had, which I didn't write peach when I first tried 10 until you said peach, but I had already gone ahead and I was already on the Cadboll. And when I tried number one, I said peach. And when I tried number two, I said, doesn't taste like number one to me. So
that the bit of peach that's closest to the pit has a different flavor than the rest of the peach. Creme de Noyau is a liqueur based on peach pits. There's the flesh of the peach, and then it gets a little bit bitterer and a little bit more floral aromatic as you get into that red bit right next to the pit. There's a bit of that in both of the original and the batch one.
Yep.
Am I gonna start deconstructing peaches now? Thanks, Dan.
Yes, please do. Sorry.
God, make food even more complicated. Don't eat that. I want to cut out the middle part and then the outside part, and I wanted to compare the two.
Totally. And so the next phase of that would be you've got cling peaches and freestone, the ones where the pit just pops right out, and the one where the flesh sticks to the pit. I wonder how different those taste. I imagine that they taste somewhat different because the interaction between the flesh and the pit would be more sort of a sharing of compounds in the cling versus the freestone. I don't know. I'm just speculating, but worth investigating for peach enthusiasts.
Batch one tastes like what I would consider like a single barrel version of the 10, where you just get some uniqueness. It's basically the same thing, but you can taste some uniqueness. And 2 tastes like a different whiskey.
Right there with you. It does. I mean, if it wasn't packaged exactly the same way, if I didn't know what the provenance of it was, I would think it was a separate expression of ours for sure. The water has just done that thing where, like if you're eating it's some style of apple that isn't sour, not like a Granny Smith, but a Jonathan or whatever it is. There's that fructosey sort of fruit sugars that are integrated into the flavor profile of the flesh of the fruit, and then there's apple pie, where you've got a distinct sweetness that is surrounded with things that remind you of apple flavor. Water has made this more apple pie-like and less apple fructose integration. That makes no sense. I'm probably just going to retract that statement in the recording if you don't mind. But it's less diverse and more focused. Vadim, you've, without giving a whole lot away, keep an eye on that space. It may or may not happen like that, but we may mess with Signet. Not I'm shutting up, but just keep an eye on it.
Wait, what was that?
you watch the Signet space. We're up to some interesting stuff. The Signet you know and love is going nowhere. But just keep an eye on that space.
Hey, Dan, I'm going to bring in just something we're not even going to taste tonight. The Toussaint. the Tusal. You know, that
Yeah, well
the
done. Yes,
chocolatey.
totally.
What
Totally.
are you going? Is that coming back, or was that limited
No.
release?
To Sale was a one and done. What we did there was we messed around with an English ale barley. So that was a floor malted. It was 330 tons of floor malted Maris Otter barley. And part of the reason we won't do it again is because the alcoholic yield of Maris Otter is not good. It was painfully expensive to convince the folks at Crisp Maltings in Great Ryburg in England to floor malt a whole bunch of Maris Otter for us. And Bill is notorious for, which, I answered that question. I don't need to answer it again. So sadly, no, Toussaint won't happen again, but it is a spectacular whiskey. I'm a huge fan of that one. Thanks for bringing it up, because it does live in this ballpark for sure.
Yeah. Well, it's got that chocolatey-ness to it.
Yeah.
That is
absolutely.
relatively unique to your lineup.
Yeah,
So-
there's not a ton of that. Based on with the exception of Signet, that's that's
Right.
there for a different reason. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
But yeah, no, Toussaint is a geek's dream. One of the things that we did in the private editions, the more boring the packaging, the geekier the story behind that whiskey. So Alta, certainly it's very nondescript packaging and one of the geekiest whiskeys that we ever made. Toussaint looks like it was packaged in a brown paper sack. Super geeky story. Geez, what was the other one? There's not much to
Astar.
A star wasn't part of the private editions, but again, super boring packaging and a really interesting story. So many interesting things about the Astar, about the 2009 and 2017 Astars. Two just spectacular whiskeys. Talk about sort of bionic original. The Astars both give you that sort of $6 million man kind of vibe when you're thinking about how they compare themselves to original. It's definitely there, but it's if you made original angry, it would become a star.
Mm.
Oh man, that's good.
Wow. So Bruce Banner versus the Hulk.
Yes. Thank you for picking that up.
Does
That's
that
awesome.
fit your age range there for you?
Wait, I was like, Bill Bixby, and I was like, oh my God, I'm old. Holy crap. So yeah, that's I haven't been to a Marvel Comics film, but the Hulk is to me Lou Ferrigno for the rest of time. You can get all the CGI in the world together and give me Lou anytime. Terrible show, but man, so much fun to watch.
Hey, Dan, I got to jump off.
Bill Bixby.
Bill Bixby is amazing.
I want to say thank you very much. I've asked Vadim to hopefully send me the recording. This has been spectacular. You are fantastic. I am really regretting that I have to sign off. Everyone, please enjoy. And Dan, thank you for your time. And thank you, Vadim.
David, thank you. Have a good evening.
Hey, thanks.
So Dan, we everybody voted for Cadboll
what was
1 versus Cadboll 2.
Yeah, who won?
You want to guess who won?
In general, 2 tends to win that. But so 2 gets my guess, but I'm not going to be surprised either way.
I'm glad we didn't have to tally up the chat, but I love a trick question all day long. Straight down the middle.
Oh, damn, look at that. Wow, that's impressive. But it goes to show that whiskey's a highly personal thing. You can read all the ratings that you want and read all the scores and all the awards and all that kind of crap, and none of it matters really. What happens inside of your head. I try to point this out as much as I can. Regardless of the experience level of the people that I'm talking to about whiskey, the idea that it is so yours, the experience is so exclusively your own that nothing else matters. Your powers of perception and evaluation and your connection to that liquid are so yours and so personal and so subjective, and they should be. They ought to be. That's built to be this thing where you and it are you against the world kind of a thing. And this stat proves it. I just think that that's the ideal result.
But also it's the mood that you're in. I mean, if I were
Totally.
looking for creamy, it'd be number 2 all day. But if I were in that mode where I'm not sure, do I want a bourbon? Do I want a scotch tonight? I'd go with number 1, you know, and
Yeah,
it's a little bit more flavor forward and all that, you know, so.
yeah, you know, to your point, it's an odd thing because they're both the same ABV. Each has these things that it does that are more pronounced or less pronounced or more lateral or more linear. And it shouldn't, because it's essentially the same liquid, except in 2 slightly different casking regimens. It's one of the things. Okay, so one of the things that Cadboll exists to celebrate is those elements of the whiskey making process that are outside our control. This is, at the end of the day, it is nature at work as much as it is people at work. And so when we make whiskeys like this, if you could talk to some of the most accomplished people in the industry, Dr. Bill Wynn being one of them, he would be the first to admit that there is, if you made a pie chart of everything that's knowable about the whiskey making process and the amount that he knows, the unknown bit is bigger still. And he still shows up at work every day and learns something new. And there's still a massive amount to know that is yet to be known, yet to be understood about this process. And so nature shows up and does its thing and paints its colors and pulls its own Bob Ross act all over these whiskeys. And we'd love that. If it was all known, if it was all controllable, then we'd be on. That's just boring. So the elements of Cadboll in particular that I love most are the celebration of those things that we cannot control about this process. And the difference between these 2 batches is a testament to that. That now batch 2 is even getting kind of a cider kind of a thing happening on the nose. It was a little more almost tiny bit savory, that kind of mango thing happening that's sort of evolved into this Calvados-y kind of a nose, not on the palate so much. But if you took that funk and that kind of oxidized apple thing, you're working on Calvados at that point.
The project series normally tweaks kind of one thing to focus on to see, you know, whether you've got the barley from Cadboll or the Alto, you've got the yeast strain. Has there ever been any talk of like making a really provincial one of, let's use Cadboll barley and our own, you know, Alto yeast strain, and if there's a oak tree on the property, let's cut it down and make a barrel out of it?
We've absolutely talked about, and as a matter of fact, 2 of those 3 elements happen every other year. So every other year, the Cadboll fields, the yield from the Cadboll fields is fermented with our own yeast. Bill hasn't exactly said, because these happened long before we developed that, before we discovered and developed that yeast strain, Saccharomyces diamat. So that wouldn't have been involved here. But moving forward, as those whiskeys mature, every other year's harvest is fermented with our own yeast. So yeah, Scottish oak is tough. It is not just a ton of it, and it is difficult to cooper. So not so much of that, but we have talked at length about maximizing the provenance of a thing. So we've got some ideas up our sleeve as far as that goes as well. So yeah, well spotted, and we're continuing to explore that territory. At some point, I don't think it's giving too much away. I'm working on a plan for a proprietary bitters. So gorse blossoms, and there's a berry. There's a berry that's native to, what the hell is it called? Like, I've got a load of it here. Dried. Damn it! I'll think of it. And some proprietary barks and such to that area as a proprietary bitters for Glenmorangie based cocktails. So that's in the works as well. I don't know quite when that'll see the light of day, but it is in the R&D phase currently. So from there, if your game,
Can we
go ahead.
volunteer to be your focus group when that becomes close to reality?
Sure. Hawthorn berries. So hawthorn bush creates a little. So Jeff, you were there when the gorse bushes were still in bloom, maybe? These gorse, these bushes with loads of yellow flowers, and the aromatics are almost straight coconut. It's amazing. You grab the blossom. Oh yeah. So on either side of those rock walls, that's Cadboll Estate barley fields. So yeah, thanks. You're spot on with your pulling that stuff up. So you keep walking down that path, and then you'll end up at a absolute bank of gorse hedge that goes on for a long time. And in the spring and early summer, it's blossoming yellow, and the whole valley just this coconut that just hangs in the air. So if you grab a gorse blossom and you just sort of smash it between your fingers, and it smells exactly like coconut. So that'll be an element. Gorse will be an element of the proprietary bitters if I ever finish that project and it gets approved and bottled and all that kind of stuff. So there's loads of hoops left to jump through in order to make that happen. We're working on it. So from there, here's what we'll do. I'm going to move to that next slide, and then we'll move on to Glenmorangie, A Tale of Winter. So that's that one. If you can see that, well, someday I'll get that right. So that's A Tale of Winter. This is a 13-year-old whiskey finished in Sicilian Marsala cask, bottle of 46 ABV. Looks like a Christmas sweater. In fact, we had sweaters made from a gal who duplicated that vibe in sweater form. I've got one upstairs.
So is this your first time releasing a Marsala cask?
At Glenmorangie, yes. At Ardbeg, no. Galileo, I want to say, was Marsala. Was part of Galileo was matured in Marsala cask. If I remember that right, I'll go back through the archives. But Ardbeg, yes, we've used Marsala cask, but at Glenmorangie, it's the first time we've used ex Marsala.
I had it confused with another M1, which was recently released as a limited release. It was Malaga.
Oh, right. Yeah. So that was a 12. Yeah, the magenta labeled 12-year Malaga cask, which was not the first time we'd used Malaga at Glenmorangie. There are older expressions of Malaga cask going back, maybe 10, 15 years ago. But Marsala, this is the first time.
So Tale of Cake had a really nice story to it. What's the tale behind the Tale of Winter?
Tale of Winter, it depends on who you talk to. If you talk to the marketing department, and typically I'll just do a screen share so that you can see Bill's tasting notes on that. Go.
I'm getting some sulfur on the nose.
Yeah, totally.
Towards the back.
Totally.
Like
there's Yep. One of the things that, and I think there's an element of truth to this. So Bill actually did get snowed in his home at one point during the winter where this idea sort of germinated in his head. This would have been 14, 15 years ago. And the idea was that sort of curling up with a blanket by the fire and having a whiskey. How do you capture that in a whiskey as it's sort of that experience in a bottle? And so the concept behind A Tale of Winter was based on that. And a lot of that's marketing hooey, and part of it's true. The idea behind experimenting with Marsala cask came about because of what Bill had done at Ardbeg. So it was a thing where that worked well. Let's try it with some Glenmoe. And this was the net result. I think at least some of the marketing, the positioning of Tale of Winter happened after reading his tasting notes. So the whiskey creation team we'll sit down with the marketing team and share their sort of their vision and their tasting notes and the imagery that the whiskey creates for them. And the marketing team will go back and say, huh, that's kind of a cool thing. Let's chat about what the emotive elements of a given whiskey. So this one came into light as it is, as you see it in front of you, at least partially because, yeah, Bill got snowed in and had an idea, and partially because of the unmistakable flavors of winter that the Marsala cask lent to the final product. One of the things that Marsala is sort of known for is this flavor of tamarind. So these crazy sort of tropical seed pods that have a very specific and unique flavor to them. Somewhere between earthy, nutty, and dried fruit. Tamarind kind of kicks that off. You'd find tamarind in Jamaican cooking. I want to say there's a decent amount of tamarind influence. It's like can't think of the damn Jamaican jerk recipes and things. You might find a little bit of a tamarind vibe to those. So even though this is, we call this Tale of Winter, to a degree, there's a little bit of a jerk spice thing happening there. So back to 46 from 43, and well spotted on the struck match note. That certainly wouldn't be part of the new make or the standard flavor profile elements of Glenmorangie, just because of the scale of the stills and the amount of sulfur reduction that would come from that much just rampant reflux. So that would be entirely attributable to the Marsala cask.
Can I ask a
Just like
question?
Yeah.
Just on labeling terms, it's always been interesting to me why ex-bourbon is labeled as ex-bourbon, but an ex-Marsala cask is labeled as a Marsala cask.
Right. Yeah, isn't that weird? Because we certainly could just leave the X off and just say bourbon cask, because the assumption is, well, it would have been a cask until bourbon went in, and then it became a bourbon cask, but the bourbon came out right, or I would be drinking bourbon right now. So yeah, I think to a degree it is Scottish whiskey nomenclature is just so much more accustomed to the concept of ex-bourbon oak and the idea that ex-bourbon oak gets multiple uses, whereas our use of finished casks, particularly casks that had low ABV liquids in them before, those would only ever be first fill. So there's no real need to go first fill, second for refill on our dessert wine cask, fortified wine cask, table wine cask. We'd use those in the same way that a chef would deglaze a pan. You're just looking to re-liquefy and capitalize on the concentrated flavors of that previous occupant. And then once you deglaze a pan, it sort of returns to being a pan. So using it again for the reason that you used it previously, it's not going to produce that result. This is fascinating. But to somebody brought up Taylor cake, obviously much different than what we were doing there with the Finnish and Hungarian Royal Tokaj cask. But you can sort of see what's happening here with the cinnamon, ginger, clove, cocoa. Certainly, I like that dried red pepper flake reference. I think that's I don't think that's all that far off. It's maybe not as direct a reference on my palate as it occurs to Bill in the tasting notes there. But I certainly get where he's going with it. There's a piquant sort of a nature to this that you can't quite put your finger on. And red pepper flake is solid, a solid call out.
Will this be an annual release, or is this a one-off?
No, one-off experimental batch. So the tail ofs are the modern equivalent of the private edition range. After the private editions were always going to be 10 years, a 10-year series. So there are 10 editions in that series. The tail ofs, these are part of what we're the term that we've coined is the Wonder Makers series. Leaned into this sort of Billy Wonka kind of a mindset that Bill brings to the whiskey creation process. So you'll see another tale of this year, and possibly moving forward into successive years. But the tale of thing is Bill's a storyteller. It's liquid storytelling. Yeah, granted, but at the end of the day, Bill's got a story to tell. And those stories are always based on an inspiration. And what he tends to do is to explore his inspirations fanatically. And then once the questions behind the inspirations are answered, it's done. He moves on. He gets bored easily and moves on. He's never really going to answer the same question twice. The core range, the prestige range of the 18 and Signet, anything that we do full-time around the clock 24/7, those are questions that were answered, sure, but they're part of an identified range of whiskeys that we're known for, and even those are in a state of evolution. If those of you who are devotees of Glenmorangie, you know that once Bud Hennessy or LVMH purchased the company, then there was a massive evolution of concepts that happened as a result. We went from calling whiskeys such exotic names as Glenmorangie Sherry Wood Finish, and Port Wood Finish, and Burgundy Wood Finish, and Madeira Wood Finish, to La Santa, Quinta and Nectar d'Or, and more evocative and emotive names. But they're essentially evolutions of the same basic concepts. Bill's always messing with and tweaking and evolving each of the expressions that he works on, and the experimental stuff. It isn't as though you'll never see these things again. For example, when Pride 1981 was an experiment in Sauterne cask. I want to say that one was finished in Yquem. I'm almost sure. So the idea behind, okay, nobody's really messed with Sauterne casks, so I'm going to do it, as Bill's sort of internal dialogue. I'm going to do it. I'm going to see how it goes. And then if it goes well, then that will inform a permanent release or part of the core range. It's a bit like Honda being involved in Formula One. Honda's not going to sell you a Formula One vehicle, but what they learn being involved in Formula One will inform the manufacture of their passenger cars. The brakes get better, the engines get more efficient, the engines get more powerful because of what they learned on the Formula One track. If Pride 81 is our Formula One vehicle, the Nectar d'Or is the passenger car equivalent of that. And what we learned using Yquem barriques to create Pride 81 was Nectar d'Or was the direct descendant of those key learnings. So that's always happening as well. Has anybody gone in with water here or no? I hesitate, but I'm going to go for it with the sake of exploration.
Dan,
Yes.
Where can we find that Pride 81?
It's tough now. Secondary market, auction sites. It's not impossible though. If Scotch whiskey auctions and things like that, finding a Pride, when they hit the shelf in retail when they were first released, which would have been 2015, 2016, something like that. They're beautiful. They're liter bottles. They're these round looking things. When it was released, it was SRP on that was $2,800 for the bottle. And it hasn't gone crazy since then on the secondary markets. I just casually keep an eye on that stuff. And Pride, you can probably still get for, I don't know. Jeff, have you seen any on the auction sites?
Says Whiskey Exchange has it for $1,500, less than $1,500.
Wow, that's
I don't
fantastic.
actually have it in stock, but
Holy
Jane, you
crap!
should
If
get-
you can
I mean,
find it at that price,
Kate, you
hell
should get
yeah.
a couple. Get a couple.
Uh,
and it's fine.
Jeff, did you see it for $4,000? Is that what what
Yeah.
you're going for though? I've
What-
seen
what-
it in that range as well.
What Brian say? What'd he find?
1,500, but
Whiskey
whiskey exchange. But there's a question as to whether it's in stock.
1466.25.
Shit, for Pride 81. Wow.
Shit.
Is that
Glenmorangie 1981. I assume 1981 is Pride 81.
Yep.
if does it show an image of the bottle?
Yeah. Here,
Is it round? Is it round like
Round.
looking at a barrel a barrel head?
Yeah, I mean, I see it online. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I don't know.
That'd be an extraordinary price. Hell, I'd buy it for that.
Yeah.
Quite a link.
Glenmorangie 81 Sauterne wood. I'm just gonna do a quick click on that because I'm morbidly curious. No, so that is not Pride 81.
That is not Pride 81.
Oh, man.
That's just an idea. That's a vintage 81 Sauterne finish whiskey. What we did with Pride was that was an extended. Let me think about that. That would have been 20. That would have been a.
Is it called Pride 81 or Pride 1981?
Pride 1981. That one was a 15. Jeez, what was it? A 15
Well,
year.
On Wine Searcher, it's more like in the $6,500.
Yeah.
I was
Okay.
just look. Yeah, that's what I just posted up there. I was looking at that.
Brian,
6,500
that's
is
also
the
in
end.
pounds.
What?
That's also in pounds.
Oh, that's in pounds?
Yeah.
No, this says $6,500. Atlantic Beach.
Yeah, the
Oh, nice.
first link you
Oh,
put-
The whiskey
the
exchange was in pounds? Oh.
yeah.
the 81 Sauterne wood. That was
Jordan
the-
already ordered it from Drizzly, I think. Did you, Jordan?
They'll be here now.
Okay. Check.
What's interesting about that 81 Sauterne wood is that Pride 81 is just basically an older version of that. Pride 81, I want to say it ended up being 28 years old. So it would have just been 7 years older version of that at cask strength, I think. Pretty sure. Yeah, so this is 46. This is a 21 year 46 ABV. Pride 81 is 28 at cask strength.
What is
But the
cask
same
strength?
idea. I don't remember on that one.
Yeah,
The
can't
ABV on Pride 81.
Oh, here, Pride 81.
Here, this one's 40 through the 81 Sauterne wood finish is 46, but Pride 81 should be 50.
Looks like 56.7.
Okay.
I'm seeing.
Yeah, that sounds familiar. And
works.
it's a stunner. Just a real delicious dram.
Dan, what's the difference between the 81 Sauternes and the 15 Sauternes?
The 81 Sauterne is all Yquem. The 15 Sauterne is like nectar. It could be anybody's Sauterne cask.
Okay.
Yeah, and again, not to give too much away, but keep an eye on that space too on us messing with dessert wine cask.
So much to watch.
Boy, that's good.
6.7. Oh,
If you get a hold of, or if you happen to visit, I don't know if they still have it, but they did. If you ever find yourself in Oklahoma City, there is a whiskey bar that's owned by some collector pals of mine, and they at least were for a time the only place that you could get a flight of all the prides.
It's down in
so
the
they-
Brickyard, isn't it?
Yep. Yeah, cool place.
Yes. Dangerous
81
place.
Very, 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 very. 81, 78, and 74. Pride. I want to say that flight is $1,000 or $1,500 or something like. But you get to keep the glasses. That's where the real value comes from. But it's a stunning flight. The only place in the world you could get that.
And it comes with a parade, right?
Yeah, I mean it's the only place where you can
Pride
do-
parade, Dan.
Yeah.
Oh,
Pride.
different sort of pride, but yeah. So that one, geez, what was it? The 28, 34, and 41 years. So the 28 is the Pride 81 finished in Sauterne in Yquem. The 78 is 34 years, and that was finished for 18 years in, is that right? 18 years in Chateau Mouton Rothschild cask. And then the last one, Pride 74, the oldest Glenmorangie ever bottled at 41 years old. That was one sherry butt and one American ASB, matured 41 years, fatted together, bottle of cask strength out the door. There were 503 bottles of Pride 74, and that one hit the shelf at just under 10,000. But they're all liters. So again, that's where the real value is.
To be fair, Brian probably has a bottle of each. They're just not open.
They're beautiful bottles too. Absolutely. I think Lalique made those for us. And the reason that they're liters, this isn't as much of a deal now as it used to be, but you 70 CLs you could ship in the UK, and 750s you could ship here, but you couldn't do. So instead of making a bunch of different bottle molds, we just made one, which was a liter that you could ship to both. Any thoughts on Taylor Winter? Anybody seeing visions of the future or predicting tomorrow's Powerball? Anything based on the flavor of that one?
I am predicting a trip to Hollywood.
Great. But I do like that. I forget how much I like that whiskey.
It seems to be a very different flavor, a real diversion from all the other Glenmorangies I've tasted.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's a little more what's the right word? What's the opposite of creaminess? Liquidy, watery, but not water.
Yeah, there's a
Less
little bit
viscosity.
more of a, yes,
Less viscosity than all the others.
more barrel spice, more astringency, more drying sensation on the palate for that one for sure. It's that cinnamon vibe where, like, if you just morbidly watching the cinnamon challenge that was happening a while back, where people were just absolutely trying to suffocate themselves, trying to consume a tablespoon of cinnamon, which is functionally impossible because of how much it just chokes you out. That sort of dryness, that distinct astringency that reminds the nose and palate of cinnamon, definitely here. Oops, picked up the wrong one.
Yeah, but to echo Jane's point, I have some bottles that I'm going to pick up at K&L tomorrow, and I see that they have this available on the shelves. It's going to be hard for me to not walk by and grab one, I fear, but
Yeah, those K&L guys, they have more of my hard-earned money than I am happy to admit.
Yeah, I'm seeing some at Mission too.
Oh, nice. Yeah, this one I want to say we did, oh geez, there were probably 3,000-4,000 cases of this that were produced total, which is usually the output of the experimental releases, give or take, depending on which release we're talking about.
It's funny just because of the relationship and between the two companies, that every time I have one of these special releases or I have an Ardbeg special release, I always wonder what it would be like on the other side. Instantly, I go like, well, what would this taste with an Ardbeg distillate? And then when I tasted the Ardbeg one, I go, well, what this taste is a Glenmo.
Absolutely. Well, and we, thankfully, it's been a long time coming. Well, a long time waiting. I had been curious for years what would happen if you used, when we get to Signet, we'll talk a little more about it. What if you use roasted barley to make an Ardbeg? And that's Ardcore. That's what we just did.
I actually tell people it's just this is peated Signet.
Peated Signet. And when I saw the specs on it, I was like, okay, that's what we're doing. Thank God, it's about damn time. And then I tried it, and I thought it would just be smoky Signet, and it's not at all. It bears almost no resemblance to Signet. Now that really shocked me because of how idiosyncratic and iconic and enigmatic Signet is. It's just so Signet-y that I figured, okay, Ardbeg's gonna make smoky Signet, and it's not. On paper, yeah. In practice, no. So if you're comfy, we'll move on to 18. If I'm missing any questions, please let me know. I don't mean to ignore. It's just my eyesight's not as good as it used to be. Good. Ooh, nice. Oh, yeah. Taylor Winter would be fantastic with cheese. Well done. Yep. Yeah. So that's the thing about Taylor Winter. There's that kind of like when you jam a bunch of cloves into an orange and then make a weird Christmas ornament out of it. That the aromatics there, that's sort of what's happening for me with Taylor Winter. And I did ginger snaps, good call. I did there was a bunch of snow and it was cold as hell, and I was home and grabbed a chair and a glass and a blanket and drank some Taylor Winter, and it really was, just sublime experience. We did a thing where we released a cocktail recipe that was a Taylor Winter hot chocolate, and I tried it and it was really good. It's a little sacrilegious, but it was really, really good.
If that's wrong, I don't want to be right.
Exactly. Exactly. It was really tasty. I fully loved it. I'm tempted to do it again, but the only reason it worked really, really well because my wife makes hot chocolate from scratch and the whipped cream and all that kind of stuff. It was just extraordinary with the Taylor Winter in it. But Nestle's Quick or whatever, I probably wouldn't have done it. Do they still even make that with the powdered Swiss Miss? Let's call it that.
But the problem with that is there's so much sugar in it.
Yeah, and tremendous amount. Fair.
And the reason why it's good when your wife makes it, I'm sure, is she doesn't start with sugar; she starts with chocolate.
Yes.
And there's a huge difference in that. And then there's more fat in it, so that it would balance out the low viscosity in the Tail of Winter. I mean, in my mind, I'm thinking it's fabulous, and I've got it down on my list of things to do when it's not 100 degrees outside.
Yeah, that's a good call. And like full cream and all that kind of stuff. You're right. That lactic mouth-filling creaminess offsets to a degree the cinnamon or barky kind of tannins.
Right. Well, just
that was good,
just
for
the
sure.
high fat in general, so you can get the fat out of the chocolate. There's a lot of fat.
Oh, yeah, totally, absolutely.
Not that I know anything about chocolate and cocoa butter. It's one of my favorite things.
I suspect you might have some insights there. So I'm jumping into 18. I can't hold out any longer. What we've got going on with 18 now, this is one, 18 we make all the time. It is part of the permanent range. It is, if you are traveling internationally at any point and you feel like picking up a bottle of travel retail Glenmorangie 19, it's a super interesting comparison between them. The 18 sees about 30% of what you have in the glass. Sees a 3-year finish in Oloroso, first fill Oloroso cask. The rest of it stays in, we'll just do a quick screen share so you've got Bill's notes on it. The rest of it stays in ex-bourbon oak throughout. Now this is a 43 ABV whiskey, and again about 30% sees a 3-year finish in first fill Oloroso. But the 19 year is all ex-bourbon oak. There's no influence of sherry in the 19 at all. So it's a really interesting comparison between the two. It's essentially if you could drink 18 without the sherry influence. This is now. Go ahead. Sorry.
There are very few 19-year-old scotches released. At least,
not very
seems
many.
to be a very rare number. And I know of another brand that did a exploration release, and they did an ex-bourbon, ex-sherry, and ex-Madeira cask 19-year-old.
Oh, who was that? That sounds familiar, but I can't think of
I
who
think it was Glenfiddich, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, right on.
And they released each individual style in different markets. So like Europe got Madeira, US got ex-bourbon,
cool.
and like you were trying to collect these Pokemon that you like had to travel to get, and it was a whole nightmare.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
It was $150 a bottle, but it came in a pretty box. That's where the money's at.
Nice. Pretty box. It's always about the pretty box.
Dan, is the 19 that's out now, is that the one that was still Brendan's baby before he left? That hit
Yeah,
his
he
actual
was
blend?
he was seriously involved in Travel Retail 19. And yes, so what's in the bottle right now probably still bears his fingerprints to a degree. It isn't one that we move. The Travel Retail 19 isn't just a giant volume driver for us. So yeah, he's probably got his fingerprints on that, at least for the time being. And then you'll see sort of successive 19s. It'll be more Jillian's input. But yeah, well spotted.
And what's
I don't know if
the retail for the Travel Retail 19? Just
I
out of
want to say
curiosity.
it's 150 maybe, or something in that range. It's not
Sounds about right.
bad. I'd say it's a little more
43?
than yeah, it's a 43 as well. It's a little more than 18, but not excessively more. So speaking of Brendan, you may have noticed that Deanston, Tobermory, Bunnahabhain, particularly Deanston, has really been rising in the ranks in terms of ratings and awards at international competitions, and I think that has a lot to do with Brendan's skill as a blender. He's an excessively talented dude, and as much as we miss him, it's great to see him focus on the brands he's focused on. Bunnahabhain has always been a favorite of mine, and I've less of a track record in history with Deanston, Tobermory, Leipzig, but certainly under his tutelage, I think that those distilleries have a real bright future in front of them. We did a tour. We were over in April and did the Bunnahabhain tour and tasting, and man, those whiskeys were drinking like a dream.
Yeah, those are all. It's always surprising that they're not just gangbusters more popular.
I know,
and out there than they are than what they are.
It's weird to me because they're extremely palatable whiskeys, lovely complexity. It's that whole approachable complexity thing that I think Glenmorangie does really well. Bunnahabhain does it extraordinarily well too. They just also do some peated stuff. We don't very often, although if you find yourself in that same travel retail environment, and you pick up the Glenmorangie 16-year tribute, a little bit peated. So that one's worth, actually the travel retail line, the Accord Elementa and Tribute 12, 14, and 16 are amazing whiskeys, absolutely amazing whiskeys. And the 19, of course, is amazing too.
I'll tell you, this 18, it's that funk note that I was saying I liked on the 10. It's as if you made like a kefir or a custard out of it with the creams I'm getting, and it just my palate in this. I want it not not milkshakey because it's obviously not that cold, but it is just thick and rich and just sits there, and it is wonderful.
Yep. This is one that never ceases to just amaze the hell out of me. Now, it's also to be full clarity. I tend to find that water is its complete kryptonite. Goes from being immense and deep and rich and layered and nuanced and stratified out all over the palate to being sort of a merely delicious whiskey, which it sounds fine, but in this case, it's a bit of a tragedy. Loads of people have added water to this and they think that it's better, and that's totally fine. But progressively older whiskeys get progressively more, like my hip, get progressively more chemically fragile. So it's easy to mess up an older whiskey with even just a little bit of water. Sometimes it works and sometimes it really doesn't. There's not a lot of middle ground. Old whiskeys tend to react either one way or the other fairly significantly in the presence of water. And this is one that I just don't think water does it any favors at all. If you've added water and you think it's better, then I'm completely wrong within the context of your reality plane. But for me, every time I add water to this, it reminds me of how much I wish I hadn't.
sacrilege for me
won't.
to say that this is my favorite one so far. This is just so sweet
Not
and
at
just all around, just hugs your tongue, and it's amazing, and it's just all
Yeah.
those things.
This is unabashedly my favorite liquid on planet Earth. You sure we've made more bombastic or more sort of regal whiskeys in the past, and we will continue to do so in the future. And I've had a few things, some cask draws from barrel samplings in the warehouses at Glenmorangie that have been just really almost like bring you to tears, stunning. But as a day in and day out available to anybody who wants it whiskey, this is to me one of, not to inject any hyperbole, but one of mankind's greatest achievements.
And I'm seeing it for 110 at Total Wine, which is
Wow, that's an incredibly good price.
is a really beating a
Those total guys. they tend to, I love them. They're great. We do a lot of business with them. They're terrific.
Yeah, the 18 reminds me of the adage that the less complex you make it as far as number of ingredients, number of process, doing all of these things, the more your execution has to be perfect.
Completely. It's sort of the Jacques Pepin sort of way of making whiskey. If you've got amazing ingredients and amazing technique, just focus on those things. You don't need it. If a tree is really good looking, it doesn't need a lot of ornaments. Bill, this is one of Bill's. I think this is one of the whiskeys he's proudest of. Is when he got to Glenmorangie in 1995. The 18-year expression wasn't great. It was all right. If you get a hold of the old tube, the tube 18, it's Jeff, do you have any of the old tube 18 with you? I knew he would.
Dan, just to set the sucker straight, the Azuma edition, it's just a pretty bottle.
Same liquid. Yes, okay. Same liquid. We'll do. There you go. And Jeff, I'm sure you have an opinion on this. I don't own the old tube 18, but the times that I've had it, it's good. It's not this. And Bill's influence on what's in the bottle now took 18 from being good to being extraordinary. And I think it's one of those things he's very proud of.
Yeah, this is a little weak compared to the current 18.
And it's funny that you say that, because I mean, if you go back to the old 43 ABV Glenmorangie sherrywood finish, it's anything but. It's a big viscous brawler of a dram. It holds its own every bit versus today's La Santa, but the old 18, there you go. I'm just gonna keep saying Glenmorangie marks, and he's just gonna keep producing them. That's amazing. The old sherrywood's very, very good. I think it can go toe to toe with today's La Santa, but the old 18 and this are not.
Yeah.
There's no comparison.
What does the 19 look like, Jeff? Can we see a bottle of that?
I went through travel retail last week and my suitcase was already completely packed. And I was going to grab one in Edinburgh and I thought, I'll wait till Dublin and then I won't have to carry it on an extra plane. Dublin had crap. So now I'm really pissed.
That is sad. I had to, the last time I went through travel retail and bought a 19, I had to throw the box out because I just didn't have the room. I kept the bottle, but I had to pitch the box.
I could have got both the travel retail and the tribute at the same time because
damn.
I know it. I'm kicking myself. Oh, well,
Tribute,
Dee's gonna be back there next month, so I'm gonna make her.
Oh, nice. Good. The Glenmoe House has all the travel retail stuff as well open. So you probably had access to trying them all, or at least some of them at Glenmoe House when you were there. The visitor center at Glenmoe has the travel retails open and available for sampling as well. Anybody who's planning a trip, but they're all absolutely delicious. They've done extraordinarily well in international competition so far. The Accord, the 12-year, on paper is not dissimilar to La Santa, but between us, I know this is being recorded, but between us, I think the Accord is actually a little bit better even than La Santa, and I love La Santa. So it's worth exploring if you get a half a chance.
Hey, Dan, I got to take off. Well, I got to wander upstairs. It's after midnight. It's been a long week.
Oh, right. Yeah, your Eastern time.
Well, we're almost to the end, but while we have a majority of the people here, do you guys want to take a quick picture? We keep losing people like flies. Let's have everyone jump on. John, Jacqueline, Shane, other John, Theo, get everyone to jump on camera for just a second. Muted. Come on camera. Let's see if we can get two more. But oh, and Jeff left. Great.
There he is. There he is.
He's back.
All right,
I had turned off my light, so
now we go. We got John Fortman. You coming on? I guess not. I tried. All right, everyone. Thank you so much, Dan. We appreciate you spending the evening with us. Thank you to everyone joining us. Cheers and smile to the camera. Perfect.
Nice. Jeff, thanks a ton for the pictures and for the references and stuff. I really appreciate it. And that apron, my God, that's a good apron. Very, very cool. Nice. You picked that up at the visitor center. Yeah, I bought one.
Actually, they gave it to me at Glenmorangie House because there was no shirts my size at the visitor center, and all my shirts are really old.
Oh, your Glenmorangie. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, all my Glenmorangie shirts are really old. So yeah, that was a long ass day. We started at like 1, and Eddie took us around and did a whole bunch of stuff. And then we
Ed's a great guy.
Oh my God, he was so great. Then we went over to the Glenmorangie House and did a mixology class.
Oh, nice.
And drank way too much whiskey there. Yes. And then Eddie came over, and then we had supper like at 9 o'clock.
Nice.
And drank way too much more whiskey. Oh my God.
Yes. The house staff is so congenial and so good at taking care of people, but they are also very generous with their pours.
Yes. We drank way too much in mixology. Oh my God.
Yes, it's a good thing that you're staying there, because you can just try to find your room after that. It's quite lovely.
It's going to have to be an annual thing now.
Oh yeah, it's such a beautiful space. But thanks, Jeff. I appreciate you being here. Hope to see you again soon, either in
good night, D.
Good night, D.
Good night, D. Miss you.
She's like, come to bed. I'm tired. See you, Dan. Thanks, guys.
Have a good one. Thank you. So as far as 18 goes, one of the things that I think is an important part of the construction of 18 is the judicious use of sherry influence. I'm sure each of you have had whiskeys, and sometimes it's a lovely sought after thing, this sherry bomb idea. Sherry as an influence can, give it an inch, and it has the capacity to take several hundred miles. But in this case, what we're trying to do is to make sure that the sherry influence here is restrained and under control by limiting how much of this ever sees the inside of a sherry cask. So it shows up mid to back palate as a sort of a dried fruit and toffee thing, as opposed to being this big mouthful of sherry influence. Sometimes a sherry whiskey can be Sherry whiskeys to me aren't particularly sessionable, and I know applying the term sessionable to whiskey is not particularly responsible, but it's that multiple drams of a sherried whiskey, aggressively sherried whiskey, to me becomes almost impossible. Like, you want to shave your tongue or something, because they just start to build up a bit. But in this case, it stays elegant. There's an elegant power to 18 year that that is the most beguiling aspect of this is that it starts in a place and then it starts to show you the immenseness of its power, but it never loses the elegantly applied nature of how it interacts with your nose and palate. Bill calls this one his Chanel No. 5 of whiskey. And I see where he's going with that. There's just so many nuances to it, so many layers. One of the things when I'm demoing 18 in seminar environments and things, I tend to, this is a relatively inane story, but I think it illustrates an interesting point. When I was in my senior year of college, that summer, I got a job driving a laundry truck for a commercial laundry facility that dealt with restaurants. So that summer, I spent my entire summer in an unair conditioned van with soiled restaurant linens the entire summer, which was quite nauseating. Every other Wednesday, though, my boss at the laundry company would let me take her car on my rounds, which were only drop-offs. No pickups and just some light drop-offs, just some napkins and stuff. So she'd let me take her car. Her car was a 12-cylinder Jaguar coupe, bright red, pull me over red. And as a newly minted 21-year-old at the time, the first thing you do in a 12-cylinder Jaguar coupe is to see how fast you can drive. So you do the math on it. It's like, this is a pretty big engine. It should just blast off the line and shred everyone in the quarter mile or whatever. And it doesn't do that. Jaguars are not engineered for that. What they're engineered to do is to deliver a power curve that you never quite find the end of. So the challenge that I posed for myself on every other Wednesday was to get behind the wheel of this thing. Then after my last drop, there's a chunk of Interstate 80, the big east-west corridor across the US that runs through Omaha. And so I'd get on the entrance ramp after my last stop, and I had this bit of interstate between myself and the exit ramp where the laundry facility was. And I'd see how fast I could go, as one does. And you one of the things that there's almost the most petrifying thing about being behind the wheel of one of those things is the faster that you go, the more in control you feel. So the even slightly more frightening or awe-inspiring aspect of it is you never find the end of its power. It's not going to blast off the line, but you never find the end of its power. And so for me, Glenmorangie 18 is like driving that car. It's elegance and power, and you never find the end of the power curve. And the more that it tells you its story, the more in control you feel. The more you feel the elegance, the beautifully engineered interface that's in the glass. It's a mind scrambler for me. I've never stopped being fascinated by this liquid. So much going on.
So I have a special place in my heart for Glenmoe, because Glenmoe 10 was the first whiskey that showed me that not all whiskey is garbage college whiskey. Like this
Right.
was my stepping stone into Scotch of like, okay, I can get into this. This was the first thing I tried where I was like, whoa,
Right.
I actually like this. And I remember, because 10 is like what, $30 realistically?
Yeah, so at this point, 40, 41-ish is where you're at.
When I started drinking Scotch 8 years ago, this was a $25, $30 bottle.
Yes.
And my dream bottle was like a $50 bottle of Balvenie 12. That was like 50
Nice.
bucks. And I
Okay.
was like, one day I'm going to afford that. And then it came a time where I could afford $50, and I was like, okay, well, Glenlivet and Glenfiddich are all like $89 for an 18-year-old.
Mhm.
But Glenmorangie 18 is always $10 more. It's always just a little bit more. And I'm like, you assholes. And it was like a dream bottle. It was that bottle that I really wanted to own. And I finally got it. I don't remember how. I had to like finagle this or that or whatever, get a coupon, whatever. But like I got the 18, and I think I still have that bottle somewhere. And like, it's one of those, like, it was the most expensive bottle I owned at the time. And like, I couldn't bring myself to open it. So it's nice to get to try it.
Yeah, yeah,
much
it
longer
is.
later.
It is one that it tends to be. It is, the funny thing about being in a competitive set with our friends at McAllen is that they tend to be the pointy end of the pricing spear in every category that they're in. So, they're 18 years, hundreds of dollars at this point. So it makes us look positively reasonable by comparison, but you're still talking about, if gasoline was priced at $140 per 750 ml, come on, that's just not. So it's an ask. It is a fairly significant ask. It better deliver based on what we're asking for it. And I think, the same thing is true for Signet. The same thing is true for the rest of the line. But this one, in terms of, if you can say any liquid that's $100+ a bottle is delivers a value equation, certainly this is one of them. It is so intriguing. There's such depth and richness and character and intrigue there that's so uniformly applied. That this is why it isn't that water is necessarily the devil's hands at work. It's just that it's so sublime in terms of its balance, its nuance, its depth, as it's presented out of the bottle, neat in the glass. That improving upon that is just it is an exercise in an infinite frustration. You're just not going to improve on what it delivers neat. As a matter of fact.
After tasting all the others tonight and then coming to this one, I am reminded I have a bottle of this one, and I am reminded why I pushed it to the back of the shelf, because it was becoming my daily drinker. I love it so much. But I love it, all the Glenmoes I've ever had, right? So I was loving everyone that we tasted. And then I came to this one and I was like, oh my God, now I remember why I hid the bottle. Yeah.
I'm glad somebody, I'm just quickly, I'm just going to point out the fact that somebody brought up the single cast nation Westport. What was that? 16. I have it here somewhere. Much more sherried than something like this. Westport's just teaspoon Glenmoe. So somebody pointed out that they weren't a giant. I appreciate it for what it is, but the Westport 16 single cast nation, as good as that whiskey is, it shows why we're so much more judicious about sherry influence here.
Have you had the Watt whiskey?
The which? I'm sorry.
Watt whiskey?
No.
16 year? That's pretty amazing. I mean,
Okay.
that's a 50, that's half strength, 57.1, but it's refill sherry. So it's, got not as much sherry as the single cast nation, but it's an independent bottler of unnamed Glenmoe. That's pretty amazing. I don't think they even call it a Westport. I think it's just called a Highland distillery.
Okay. I do have the Thompson Brothers. Haven't opened it yet. The Thompson Brothers Glenmoe. The one with the giraffe on it. That's not called Glenmoe. I bought it just as a novelty act, but I haven't opened it. Do you have any insight into that one?
I don't, but I know Thompson Brothers is usually pretty good stuff.
Did you see this? And this is another one of those reasons that K&L basically owns my soul. They did a series of what did they call it? It was a series of they didn't call them Ardbegs, but they're
Thompson
did? Brothers. Yeah. It was three. I gotta find the answers to that. It was Redacted Brothers is what they called it. It was I have reason to suspect that those are all Ardbegs, and the price of them, because those were late 20s, I want to say, in terms of age and cast string, and the prices of them, even though it was a relatively pricey series, by comparison, if you were buying those as labeled Ardbegs or whatever, they'd be 4 or 5 times as much. So I picked those
are
off.
$300, like $30-year-old ones, right? 29,
Yes,
20, 30,
yes.
31.
Yeah, there's
I heard there were-
reason to believe that there are bigs. I'm not quite sure. Have you heard something different?
I've heard it was, I think Quad picked up all those bottles. And somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but he was saying they were Lafroigs, but I don't know.
They might be. I'd heard.
They're
I'd heard that.
superheated.
Yeah. Totally. And mine are still, my colleague Travis is going to pick them up. They're at the K&L Hollywood store right now. He's going to pick them up for me, but, yeah, I can't wait. Well, I can wait to dig into them because it's one of those, that level of bottle. You're like, is this a special enough occasion? Then it drives me nuts because it's like, well, today it's a day ending in Y. Yes, it's a special enough occasion to crack that bottle. I just don't have them with me currently, but yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if they weren't Ardbegs. But I was too intrigued to let them get away.
Very different than Glenmo.
Yes. Yes, indeed.
Brian, do you have any special Glenmos you want to open today on a day that ends in Y for this special occasion?
I don't even see anyone in here named Brian, but
Cheers. Would you like to open a bottle?
I have my Astar. Before I was muted, I was drinking some of my Astar.
Which, with the 2009 or the
low.
2017?
2017.
Ooh, nice, beautiful. That was a Brendan. Brendan was all over that one.
And then also I have a door knock as a wedding gift. A friend got me a couple door knocks from Travel Retail. It looks like I think I already finished one, so the other one's packed away somewhere.
Yeah,
it's a Signet yet. We can all talk about the 18, but when you talk about, everyone that knows me knows that I'm a cast strength, whatever. I'm not starting my video. No, Vadim. Vadim's asking me to start the video.
That's a solid no.
After he muted me. We're not at Signet yet, but I'll tell you, I wish Signet was a little more reasonably priced like the 18, because that one, I find myself going to it, about to have some, like, not as a daily drinker, because I don't really do daily drinkers anymore, but I'm just in the mood for something. I'm just in the mood. And like, I look at that bottle, it sits on my bar, and yes, it's open, Vadim. And I'm just like, even though it's not what we'd call my proof, it's just so good. We're not there yet, so I'll hold off. You can mute me, Vadim. It's okay.
So we did a thing, and it was restricted to. Let me see if I can find it.
By the way, like some people in the group found it somewhere at a good price, and I should have bought two, but I was like, who was it? Was it Kate? Yeah,
I think so. She found him at like $150 or something, and
it was so good.
Told everyone, and everyone got a bottle.
I know. I wish. Here, I'm sweet. I'll be right back.
I drive down to Ohio to buy it because I can save $50 a bottle than buying it in Michigan.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, now it's only like $269 to $246 at High Time.
And that's about where we are nationally in that 240, 250 range.
But I've heard that batch to batch, they're quite different, right?
They are. Yeah. So what you want to do is you want to look at, there's a little laser etch code. I don't know if you'll be able to see this. Hopefully if I get my face out of the way, there you go. So that laser etch code will tell you the batch and the bottling date. Is that still on there? And so as you pick up your various signets, just check that they're different bottling dates and batch codes, and you will absolutely find differences between them. And Bill would be the first to admit that Signet will not always be an identical or even kind of, all the Signets share a basic flavor profile, but what's accentuated? Is it more the espresso note? Is it more the cocoa note? Is it more the biscuit note? Each of them has this sort of personality all their own. And I was going to mention that we did a couple interesting things with the world of Signet, and we're going to continue to sort of mess around there. But we did a thing called for those of you who travel to South Korea, or you have a plan to.
Only north on my end.
Just north for you? Okay,
Yeah.
fair. We did a thing called a Signet Ristretto that was exclusive to Incheon Airport in travel retail at Incheon Airport in South Korea. That's more the emphasis on the coffee element is more pronounced. We did a thing earlier this year.
Is that a big
with-
market for you guys? Like that one
Yeah.
airport in South Korea? Is that like
Well, South Korea in general, we do pretty well there, and I'm not quite
wow.
sure why we picked Incheon as the release point for Signet Ristretto, but we'll continue to mess with Signet in the future. I'm not quite sure what the release plan there is, but it's, again, as I mentioned, just keep an eye on that space. If you happen to find yourself at the duty-free shop in Dubai, we did a partnership with Givenchy, Givenchy's Gentleman Cologne, that we did a Signet inspired Givenchy Gentleman. And the bottle looks a little bit like a Signet bottle, but it was developed with Dr. Bill and inspired by Signet. So if you happen to be, wandering through duty free in Dubai, you can pick one of those up as well. So Signet, a complicated story, a complicated whiskey. The packaging is enigmatic. It doesn't really tell you much. And that's the point. Signet is one of those whiskeys that you kind of need to experience before you have any real understanding of what the point is. The earlier discussion about Ardbeg Ardcore and the use of roasted barley at Ardbeg. Roasted barley is not a friendly grain to try to make alcohol with, because you've done two things that have gotten in your own way. When you malt barley, you begin the process of creating fermentable sugar from unfermentable starch, and all you're really doing in the primary phase of malting, you're not producing sugar yet. What you're doing is producing the potential for sugar by activating enzymes within the structure of the barley grain itself. So you end up you'll start the germination process. So some conversion has begun, but you're really just looking to freeze that process in action by drying it out and a sort of suspended animation, so that the process of germination doesn't begin to steal too much of your fermentable sugar potential from the grain itself. So then you go from 40+% moisture during the germination phase back down to 4 or 5% for storage and delivery to the distilleries. And in normal circumstances, then you would crush that into a grist, add hot water, reactivate the enzymes. The enzymes go back to their job of breaking down the protein structures, accessing and unraveling the starch spirals into fermentable sugars, so that the yeast can begin its action of metabolizing sugar and producing alcohol and carbon dioxide as a digestive result. But if you roast germinated and dried malted, i.e. malted barley, if you roast it like a coffee bean until it's almost black, you've done two things that have really screwed you to a degree. You've killed those enzymes, so they're done. And any starches that were converted into sugar during the germination phase are now so caramelized that their chemical structure is far too complex for yeast to act on. So your alcoholic yield, when you begin to introduce roasted barley as your modifying grain in the mash bill, your alcoholic yield begins to drop precipitously. If you tried to make alcohol from 100% roasted barley, you would get no alcohol because of that, because you've killed the enzymes and caramelized any sugars that were there. So yeast
and do you
doesn't know what
get
the hell
sort
to
of
do with it.
is it the extreme opposite of like with Irish, with single pot still using the unmalted barley? Do you end up with that same, it's not friendly. It doesn't like
It doesn't. Yeah, for the opposite reason. Absolutely. Green malt is called green malt, not necessarily based on the whole chlorophyll and plant growing and all that kind of stuff, but green malt tends to produce distillate that tastes like green apples. There's and I forget the chemical name of the compound, but distillate produced from sprouted but technically malted but then not dried, or i.e. green malt. You have to process it differently. You got to use a wet hammer mill. You can't, because if you put it through a roller mill, it would just smear because it's not dried. It's a germinating grain. So you got to pound it into a powder via a hammer mill. So all of those things are just processing green malt is very difficult, but it tends to produce this very Granny Smith apple distillate as well, which is a difficult thing to sort of cope with in terms of trying to make a balanced and nuanced whiskey out of it. And the Irish are very good at it, and single pot still whiskey. There's some great stuff happening there. And green malt is obsessively challenging to work with in the same level of challenging, as you pointed out, is in the same level of challenging that roasted barley is, for the exact opposite reason. So one of the things we were talking about hardcore, when you peat barley, one of the things that you do is that you're going from 40% moisture down to your storage moisture level of 4%. When you peat barley, you've got to hit it with peat smoke between 30% moisture and 15% moisture, and all the peat derived phenols will stick to the husk in that moisture range. If it's too wet, it won't stick. If it's too dry, it won't stick. So you hit it between 30 and 15. The trouble with roasting peated barley is if all the peat derived phenols are concentrated on the husk, roasting burns the husk away. So part of the reason that hardcore doesn't taste like smoky Signet is that the smoke from the roasted barley, there isn't any because the husks are gone.
Could that be done in reverse, where they roast it first and then peat it? I mean, it sounds a little weird, but would
it be better to go to just make it a 50-50? Like you've got roasted barley and then you have peated barley.
And that's what we would have done with hardcore. So it wouldn't have all been roasted because you wouldn't have got any alcohol anyway. So the component that was roasted had no peat component because the husks were gone. And if you did it backwards, there's still no husk because roasting would have burned the husk away. So there's nothing for the peat to stick to either way. But yeah, to your point, hardcore was not a full, and that was black patent malt. So that was roasted even more aggressively than the high roast chocolate malt that we use for Signet. It's just that with the husk gone, you're not going to capitalize on any peat derived phenols in that percentage, whatever that was. In Signet, it's about, oh geez, that's a complicated thing because Signet is 7 or 8, depending on who you're talking about or who you're talking to. Singularly produced Glenmorangies woven together to create Signet. So even if you said that the mash bill for the heart of Signet that incorporates roasted barley is about 20% of that mash bill, that's still only one of 7 or 8 components that make Signet. When hardcore happened, slightly simpler process, but I don't know what percentage of peated black patent malt was used to create hardcore. That's one I got to go back and dig into the facts on. But the real challenge there was without a husk, there's no phenols.
So if we were going to really nerd this out and make actually peated Signet, which Ardbeg would we use to blend? I mean, we're going to just take Signet and we're going to blend it with an Ardbeg. Which Ardbeg do we use?
Oogie. One of the things that we do with Signet is there's an element of Signet that sees a 5-year finish in first fill Oloroso. So this is one of those things that we can't necessarily say in the public sector, but if you took all the casks on an average vatting of Signet, you took all the casks that go into a vatting of Signet and you average their ages out, that number would be about 21. Now, 2 of the elements of Signet that are in that age range One of them gets a 5-year finish in new charred white American oak. One of them gets a 5-year finish in first fill Oloroso. So if you were to swap out that 18 to 20-year-old sherry influenced Glenmorangie that goes into Signet with Oogie, you'd still get the sherry influence, but you'd get a fair amount of then Oogie. One of the things about Oogie is it isn't particularly, I don't think that it comes across as peated. So if you put peated whiskey into American oak cask and into an Oloroso sherry cask for the same amount of time, the Ardbeg in sherry cask will be less perceptibly smoky in the same period of time because, and nobody's quite sure why this is, but sherry casks steal the perceived smokiness of peated whiskeys faster than their American oak counterparts. So one of the reasons that Oogie doesn't come across as particularly a smoke bomb, more of like a really fantastic McGriddle. It's kind of a sausagey kind of biscuity wafting of smoke. It's because the sherry influence is attenuating the smoke influence down quite a bit. So if you were to vat a little bit, of course you couldn't, and it's still called a Glenmo, but if you were to make a vatted malt, an Ardmorangie Signet, a bit of Oogie would be delicious in that. It would be much more of an obvious smokedness than we'd be able to achieve if we were just trying to use smoked peated barley. Roasted peated barley to create Signet, smoky Signet. If that makes any sense at all.
Yeah.
So we're back up to 46 ABV here, by the way. So I'd mentioned when we were talking about the Cadbolls, there is some estate grown barley. There is an older version of Cadboll estate that goes into that is one of the components of Signet as well. So if you think of Signet as liquid tiramisu, that biscuity, that slightly nutty biscuity baked goods layer, that's really a slightly older Cadboll estate that's delivering that sort of round biscuity baked goods note. Just a spectacular dram. This is one. Bill's a big proponent of serving Signet on a ice ball, and all that's really going to do, depending on the vatting, is bring out more of that chewy, fudgy thing. The chocolate fudginess tends to come quite a bit forward once Signet is served on a big nugget of ice. I tend to drink this one neat because I like the candied orange peel and the like Turkish coffee thing that's happening in there, that mocha, the mascarpone and soaked ladyfingers element of tiramisu that really comes flooding forward here.
Your battery on your camera is about to
Oh
die.
shit! Sorry, I'm going to change that quick and be right back.
In the meantime, we're talking about when you do combine and make, what is it? Ardmorangie?
Glenbeg, Ardmorangie, whatever you want to call it.
And your mascot is going to be a giraffe pirate. Will the giraffe pirate have a peg leg or a
oh, good question.
Or
yes, super good question.
Have a parrot?
Did you and does anybody own a bottle of Ardbeg with our ex distillery manager Mickey Heads as a pirate? Probably Mickey in a giraffe costume as a pirate would be maybe the best way of handling that. Brian, I love those sunglasses. They're awesome. Very nice.
We do have Ardbeg. We missed on Ardcore. But
oh, right. They're both fantastic. Ardcore, oddly enough, the committee releases the Ardbeg Day expressions tend to get a lot of the attention because they're castering. But this year's IWC, the International Whiskey Competition, our friends at Aberlour took home first place with the release of Aberlour Abunar, the castering sherried Aberlour. Second place though was 46 ABV Ardcore.
So the non-committee release.
Right. Yeah.
Interesting. Because I've
heard from a bunch of friends, this is one of the few years they prefer the non-committee release.
Yep. Yeah.
Why don't you tell me that, Jason? In time. Oh, well.
Yeah, parsing through that, it's always difficult. Each one of those Ardbeg Day releases, some of them I prefer the cast strength version. Some of them I prefer the 46. What was it? The black sherry cask, Dark Cove was one that I preferred the cast strength. But then when we got into Ardbeg Black,
That was 50.7 for the committee release.
Nice, yeah. I preferred the 46 of the Ardbeg Black. So it really, I think it depends on the expression.
Hey, Dan, what
Such a
was
lovely
that
dream, yeah.
that you were saying, if you're flying through Dubai, you should pick up?
Oh, it's a cologne. Givenchy Gentleman is the men's cologne that we did a Signet inspired collaboration with Givenchy to create that cologne.
Check to the chat.
There it
That's
is.
the right one.
Yeah, I think that's it.
So it's available at Sephora.
Yeah, thank you. No, I'm not going to buy the cologne, by the way.
Oh, my birthday just
Not
passed.
into fragrances. Doesn't work for me.
That one, did we do?
ABV
That's
on the
that's good question.
Okay, you
That
should
one
know you don't actually have to open bottles. You can just buy them.
Just smell them.
Boy, this sure does look like the. They told me that the Signet inspired one was only at Dubai duty free, but that sure looks like the bottle.
Right, that looks just
So,
like the Signet bottle.
It does, yeah. That was the whole idea, was to kind of hint at Signet in the packaging. So that sure looks like it.
I mean, I'd be fine with smelling like Signet.
Yes, see, exactly. Or you could just go grab your bottle of Signet. And
Yeah,
dab
why do you
little
need a
on
cologne?
it.
Just use, that's what the cork is for. It's
Exactly.
it's clearly
you
as
know
heavy as an
what?
entire bottle of cologne.
I'm not going to waste that little splash on myself. I'm going to drink that little splash because I'm
To
going to
be
enjoy
fair, the bottle of
every
whiskey is
splash in that
cheaper
bottle.
than the cologne. Because the cologne is
Fair.
$100 for 100 mils. You
Right,
get 750 of the whiskey, and you can drink it.
Much more reasonable.
Yeah,
You
and
can
it
just put
probably smells better.
one of the little atomizer balls on the end of it and just sort of go to town.
Totally.
Oh, let's find
That's
out
a
what's
lovely
everyone's
jam.
favorite of the night.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's see. So what's funny is I've had a few samples of Signet in the past, and people sing praises for it, right? People love Signet. And I've had maybe 2 or 3 samples. I mean, I'm not flooded with it, but I've never been blown away by it, except this one, because different batches are different. Maybe it's my palate that's changed, but I've had, it's good, but it's okay, whatever. I don't know why people are spending $200 on it. And this one, I'm like, okay, it's totally different. I get it. It's different. It's unique. It's interesting.
Yep.
Should have gone in on
Yeah.
the Kate train, because this one's awesome.
I haven't had that one yet.
You know, while I love the Signet, I bought 2 bottles of it. That's how much I love it. And I'm not an espresso drinker, and yet I still love it. Ultimately, I think on a daily basis or on a regular basis, the 18 blows me away. I think I have to be in the mood for the Signet.
That's a good point. One of the things that we end up talking about in seminars across the country is this idea that your interface with whiskey is very much dependent on where your headspace is at. And Ardbeg is one where you have to kind of address that idea that I'm a huge music fan, but if somebody put a set of headphones on me and sent Slayer through my head at 110 dB in the middle of like 10:30 watching Good Morning America or something, I'm just not in that headspace. I love Slayer, but it's not. It's like if somebody hands you a Sprite and they're telling you it's a club soda, or the other way around, you're not in the right headspace, even though each of those liquids you have no issue with. Ardbeg 10 is slightly different. You could hand that to me anytime, day or night, and it's always going to make me happy. But peated whiskey, unpeated whiskey, Signet, those whiskeys, Stravinsky, Mahler, whoever it is that you're listening to, or movies. If you want to watch, Free Willy or something, and somebody puts on Citizen Kane, there's nothing wrong with either of those films. You just need to sort of be in the headspace that's the most resonant and synergistic to be to have that be a successful resonant frequency for you. And I don't think that people give themselves enough slack to be open to that idea. It's like, oh, I drank Springbank that one time and it did, or whatever I was drinking some Long Row and now, geez, maybe I shouldn't buy any Springbank or whatever. You just have to be in tune with where your head's at and allow the opportunity, allow for the eventuality that it might not have worked in that moment, and it's totally okay.
And when are you coming to LA?
The funny thing is, I am. Geez, when is that happening? Whiskey X Los Angeles is happening. Oh boy, Travis is such a stud that I tend to he tends to handle.
You're talking about that thing that's in August?
No, I
I
think that's
think so. Whiskey X LA is Whiskey X blah, blah, blah. Los Angeles, October 7th.
Marked on the calendar.
It's at a place called Magic Box. I don't know quite what that is, but
I'm
I'll be there.
hoping you're gonna fly in a couple of days early, right?
I don't see why I wouldn't. Let's see. October.
That's our
7.
nickname for Vadim's house.
Oh, right on. October 7. Let me just see what's going on. October 7, October 6. Econo Tour Charleston. Oh, here's the thing. So I'll be in South Carolina on the 5th, but I would be super glad to fly in on the 6th if y'all felt like getting together and doing some wacky stuff. I'd be all over that.
I have a tasting already set on the calendar on the 6th, but I will reach out and try to move them to the 5th so we can all meet up on the 6th.
Yeah, I would love that.
Just so we can drink some wacky stuff and hang out. I feel like that could be really
love
fun.
That. I would super love that.
As much as everyone would not drive to Bellflower on any other occasion, you all will make the trek for Dan. Yeah. Kate was saying how she loves Glenmo's, but I think Glenmo Dan is her favorite expression.
Oh, nice. Excellent. Yay. That's
Yeah,
terrific.
that's right. That's right, Vadim. Yep.
Yeah, I've been looking for an excuse to hang out in LA for a while now, and Whiskey X LA is the perfect opportunity to do so. So if you're feeling it, I'd be all over that. What we just decided was that it's the 6th. I'm gonna drop just a note. So that's gonna be it's a Saturday. So 17, gather.
Kate, did you say that it was the Quinta Ruban is your favorite? Which one was your favorite?
18 of this evening. Yeah.
Oh, no. Okay. I thought it was something else. Okay.
18 is lovely. What we did a few years back with Quinta, making it a 14 instead of a 12. If you get a chance to try those side by side, the black box, black label 12-year, and the green label green box 14-year. It's really interesting how it speaks to Bill's sort of constant state of evolution, even with the core range. You think a thing is a thing, and then he decides, nope, it's going to go this direction now. Lump it, and it's always, wow. I thought this was amazing. This is damned amazing. So. The evolution of Quinta Ruban is sort of that idea of Bill's restlessness in microcosm.
Speaking of Bill, you keep bringing him up.
It's funny you mentioned the Quinta because that's one of my favorite Glenmos.
Mm-hmm.
It was one of it. I originally, the first time I ever had Glenmo was in that was in that tasting kit, and it was the black,
the 12,
Quinta, and I was just kind of like meh. And then I got another one a few years later and got the 14, and I was like, whoa, what the heck is this? and it's become a staple on my shelf now. It's just amazing the difference 2 years actually made. It's kind of funny
Yep.
that you mentioned that
Yeah.
specifically.
And we
Fully
love the
agree.
12s. We had the 12 at our wedding.
And that's the thing that 12 does. The 12 does some really amazing stuff. It tends to be the 12 as you'd expect, well, not as you'd expect, but as a 12-year-old, it is. I've been trying to kind of build this analogy between the 12 and the 14. If so you got two heavyweights. One is Muhammad Ali, and the other one is Mike Tyson. One of them shows enough patience to allow you to just kind of wear yourself out and then beats the shit out of you in the late rounds. The other one is looking for your off button in the early rounds. So Quinta 12 is ready to go. Forward to mid palate, explosion in the mid palate, loads of this kind of cherry and blood orange thing. It's boom, whammo. 14 is a more patient interface. It will take you down.
Uh-oh. Uh-oh.
We lost them.
It'll really take you down.
literally takes you down.
Dan, you've gone down.
Did his camera like just shut down or something? Or
We lost sound. Probably his internet. Let me text him that he's down.
Glenmoe, I think, is my favorite Scotch just all around. You know, kind of haven't had one that I don't love yet. So
I'm drinking my last sample. So I've gotten in the habit lately of every time I have a limited release kind of bottle or whatever, I always grab at least 1 or 2 sample ounces and put it in a little vial just to put in a library somewhere. And so this is the last ounce I've got of the Alta. And it's so good.
this is a really smart idea, Jason. I'm probably gonna follow you on
Well,
that.
I found
yeah.
I was always worried that like what happens when it's gone, but when the bottle starts getting low, you need to drink it because you're losing quality.
Mm-hmm.
So the trick is you take the first ounce, not the last ounce.
I take it about in the middle. Yeah, I have a couple of drinks and then I go and put in my couple of samples.
Yeah, but generally you want as little oxidation as possible. So you put a sample and you put as little oxygen as possible, seal it, tape it up, put it in your library, and you're good.
Well,
3 years later.
so oxygen's not really your problem because it's been oxidizing in a barrel for 15 years already. It's evaporation.
Well, no, but
The evaporation inside the bottle itself is changing the taste of the actual whiskey.
Yeah.
Right, but also the volatiles are burning off, you know,
Yeah.
flavors.
Yeah,
and stuff.
as the ABV drops, you're losing some of those volatiles. Yeah, I had to dump it was a quarter of a bottle of Lager 16 because it had just been in the back of my shelf for like a year and a half at like a quarter of it left. It was awful.
There is a power outage in Omaha, so he has no service at all.
Bummer.
He sent us his best, and he's trying to work something out, but it's pitch darkness, and I think he's in the basement. So, for obvious reasons, he's trying to figure out what to do.
Just have him call in on his cell, and we'll just.
Well, he's trying to make sure his wife's okay and the cat's not freaking out because pitch dark, and it's like the middle of the night. So we'll make we'll hang out. We can do this. We can do.
Well, if he needs to.
So we were saying, what were we saying about Dan? All these bad things. He can hear you.
Cool. I like that view.
Don't complain. We have a view. As long as we have audio, we should be good. You're still muted. You're still muted.
Yeah.
That was me.
There you are.
Sorry about that. Yeah, we
all
had
good.
just the most random power outage ever. But I've I've kept you all longer than I'm sure that you had anticipated. But I appreciate your time and attention and patience as I work through my random power outage. Looking forward to hanging out with you in October if that works out for everybody. I would be glad and honored to come and have a few drams with you if you're game. We'll make it work.
Awesome. Dan, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. I know with power outage and everything, we appreciate the time you spent with us. We love having you on. Anytime you want to come back, and hopefully we can make October work. But all that said, please give our best to your lovely wife for letting you spend the evening with us.
Did you do the poll results? Did I miss it? The poll results?
Poll
results. Yeah, shit. Yeah.
Yeah. So we did a poll for favorite expression of the night. It's another trick question, so I'm not gonna mess with you. Here are the results. 40% voted 18-year and 40% voted for Signet. And the other 20% are evenly spread between Cadboll 1, Cadboll 2, and Tale of Winter.
Nice. Very cool. Wow. And again, it's fantastic. Those results are perfect. Absolutely fantastic.
Yeah. So absolutely fantastic whiskey. We love having you on anytime as much as we can. Thank you so much for dropping a ton of knowledge on us. We appreciate it.
Please, anybody feel free if you want to drop me a note, DM me at GlenmoDan on Instagram, or my email address. I'll just drop it into the chat here. Part of what I do for a living is to try to make this stuff resonant and meaningful to you in any way that I can. So please feel free to drop me a note if you've got questions, you've got feedback for me, if you've got insights that you'd like me to feed up to the brand team. Don't hesitate. I'd love to stay in touch.
Awesome. And you have a couple of podcasts that you're in. Do you want to share people so can they follow you?
Yeah, if you're feeling it. I've had to we're on a tiny bit of hiatus because I'm traveling so much now. But the Whiskey and the Arts podcast, which is about, just put the name in there, Whiskey and the Arts podcast. Oops.
I tried listening to that. It was not enough whiskey and way too much music for me. But
a lot of music talk. Yeah, so it's one of those things. What we try to do is to draw some parallels between whiskey as a form of nonverbal communication and music and theater and architecture and all these other ways of that people communicate with one another without using language. And so that's what the show's about. And I think there's 9 episodes up now. We'll get some more happening when I'm back off the road for a bit. But it was a pandemic thing it's a thing I'd been kicking around for a while, and so we made it happen for it. Bill's on one. There's an episode with Dr. Bill that I think that you'll find very interesting, and we talk a lot about music with Bill in that one as well.
I'll have to catch that. Yeah, there was one with you and Joshua Hatton.
Josh was on. It was a lot of fun.
I had to catch that one.
It was great. He's such a gregarious and generous
he probably talked a lot about music.
He did, and we did, and it was great. So anybody that we had on, we asked them to contribute to the companion playlist on Spotify. So be sure to check out the playlist as well. There's a lot of interesting stuff, including some input from Bill.
You play in a band? You're a rock star, right?
I do. When I am a musician. How do we follow you? How do we
download your music?
It doesn't happen much. I have some very generous musical friends here in town that let me do music stuff in public every 6 months or so. I'm playing another show at the beginning of August with a vocalist friend of mine at a jazz club here called The Jewel here in Omaha. So that'll happen. From time to time, I'll drop some interesting, depending on your perspective, some interesting beats on my Instagram page from behind my kit over there. And that'll happen again soon. I'm engineering some more of that. But yeah, just stuff, just random dabblences.
What do you play?
Drums.
You're a drum guy. Okay. Oh, it's impressive. I've always been amazed by drummers. I understand how a guitar works. I understand how bass works. Like there's a lot of instruments I understand.
Sure.
The whole two hands and feet going at different rhythms and making music, that just like blows my mind. I can't wrap my head around it.
It's a lot of fun. There is some challenges associated with it, but it's visceral, and it's one of those. It's a nice stress reliever, just randomly hitting things very hard in a certain rhythm. It's a catharsis, which is nice.
I can see it. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Have a fantastic evening. Hopefully no more blackouts, but we appreciate
Yeah,
your time.
that was weird.
Hope to see you again soon.
Thanks again. Yeah, we'll see you all in August. I appreciate your time and attention. Thanks for spending your evening drinking Glenmorangie with me, and I hope we get a chance to do it again soon.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, Dan.
Thank you.